Beneath a ruined fortress in southern France lies a sealed chamber, a place never intended for discovery. Lacking keys or overt entrances, it harbors a profound mystery, a subtle intimation of something concealed within the darkness. For over 7 centuries, the Earth has meticulously guarded this secret. It is a stone vault rumored to contain a treasure of such sacred and perilous nature that it once fractured an empire. This treasure is not comprised of gold or jewels, but rather forbidden knowledge, encrypted and systematically erased. If the ancient legends prove accurate, the ultimate secret of the Knights Templar is not merely lost, it slumbers, and its discovery may be unwelcome. To truly apprehend this narrative, it is advisable to create an atmosphere conducive to reflection, allowing the echoes of the past to resonate. For the secrets about to be unveiled are not easily disturbed. The history of the Knights Templar, though frequently introduced with a narrative simplicity akin to a fairy tale, is far from a mere bedtime story. Its origins trace back to the aftermath of the First Crusade, when 9 warrior monks pledged themselves to safeguard pilgrims embarking on the arduous journey to Jerusalem. They embraced vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, dwelling in dormitories, exhibiting formidable precision in combat, and bearing a red cross emblazoned upon white tunics, symbols of purity and sacrifice. Yet, from these humble beginnings, an unstoppable force emerged. By the 12th century, the order had evolved into one of the most formidable institutions in medieval Europe. Their holdings encompassed vast landed estates, impregnable castles, extensive banking operations, intricate trade routes, and exclusive rights. They transitioned from protectors of pilgrims to guardians of popes, kings, and sacred relics. Their influence spanned an immense geographical area, from Scotland to Cyprus, and their financial resources accumulated at a rate that even monarchs struggled to quantify. Whispers of ancient knowledge began to envelop their name like an ethereal mist, and the Templars, far from dispelling these rumors, may have actively fostered them. Then arrived the fateful night of the 13th of October, 1307, a date forever associated with the profound misfortune it inaugurated. Under the direct command of King Philip IV of France, hundreds of Templars were apprehended in a single, meticulously orchestrated strike. They endured torture, underwent trials, and faced execution. Their Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, was tragically burned alive. The once invincible order seemed to dissipate into ashes, extinguished with startling rapidity. However, a particular detail has consistently troubled historians. When royal agents stormed the Paris Temple, the presumed epicenter of Templar wealth and power, they discovered nothing substantial. No vaults, no revered relics, no gold. Everything had vanished, not stolen or confiscated, but simply gone without a trace. Furthermore, the entire Templar fleet, reportedly docked at La Rochelle, disappeared within the same week. There were no bodies, no wreckage, not even any financial ledgers, as if the vessels had either slipped into an alternate dimension or possessed prior knowledge of the impending danger, enabling their timely departure. This leads directly to the enigma of the vault. Situated near the ancient site of Gisors, buried beneath layers of medieval masonry, lies a chamber that no one has dared to open. Prior attempts at excavation were met with governmental intervention, and the site was subsequently sealed. Some dismiss it as an elaborate deception, others believe it to be a tomb, yet one individual asserted that it was more than a mere vault. It represented the concluding chapter of the Templar narrative, a sanctuary meticulously constructed to transcend the ravages of time, to survive fire, betrayal, the machinations of kings, and the scrutiny of inquisitions. This profound mystery compels further investigation, prompting inquiries into the nature of such an invaluable concealment, and pursuing a legacy meticulously erased from official records, now preserved only in scattered fragments, enduring myths and unsettling silences. For within those shadows the truth patiently awaits discovery. To facilitate a comprehensive exploration of these historical mysteries, it is advisable to remain informed of subsequent analyses. There are vaults meticulously crafted by human hands, And then there are vaults composed of silence, of fear, of memories, interred so deeply they begin to question their own existence. However, the mere act of forgetting does not equate to complete disappearance. The treasure of the Templars may indeed remain unseen, unless one is prepared to meticulously follow the subtle clues they left behind. The sudden collapse of a formidable organization commenced with a sunrise that metaphorically stained Paris like spilled ink. The date was Friday, the 13th of October 1307. By the time the city's bells roused the dormant cobblestones, the meticulously prepared trap had irrevocably closed. Across France, dozens of castles and commanderies belonging to the Knights Templar were seized. Hundreds of brethren, individuals who had once served alongside royalty and whose reputations were built on strict discipline and discretion, were forcibly removed from their lodgings, shackled, and transported to dungeons. The charges heresy, idolatry, and unnatural vices were suspiciously synchronized, impeccably timed, and utterly devastating. One can almost perceive the resounding echo of iron doors slamming shut. The operation, conceived in profound secrecy by King Philip IV and executed with surgical cruelty, remains one of the most coordinated mass arrests in medieval European history. Remarkably, no one, not even the Pope, was forewarned. Indeed, the Vicar of Christ himself, Clement V, was caught unaware, a perplexing circumstance given that the Templars reported directly to the papacy. If they were culpable of spiritual offenses, such matters should have fallen under the jurisdiction of Rome. However, Philip did not defer, and indeed, he could not, for the underlying motivation was not religious doctrine. It was, as is often the case, financial. By 1307, Philip found himself deeply embroiled in debt. Prolonged wars, extravagant court expenditures, and a personal disposition characterized by an intense pursuit of wealth had depleted the royal coffers. The Templars, consistently efficient and discreet, had effectively become the de facto bankers of Europe. Like any financial institution, they maintained meticulous records of loans, interest accrued, and, significantly, of monarchs who had borrowed beyond their repayment capacity. One king, in particular, was heavily indebted. Consequently, rather than settling his financial obligations, Philip chose to disrupt the entire system. He meticulously portrayed the Templars as demonic figures cloaked in monks' robes, alleging that they desecrated the cross, venerated an enigmatic head, and engaged in illicit acts during their initiation rites. These claims, while undeniably scandalous, were remarkably convenient, particularly for a monarch desperately requiring a scapegoat sufficiently prominent to divert attention from his own impending financial ruin. And to a certain extent, it succeeded. The abruptness of the arrests sent shockwaves throughout Europe. Here was a military order that had operated for nearly 2 centuries, explicitly sanctioned by the Pope himself, reduced overnight to a state of shackled imprisonment. In Paris alone, 138 Templars were apprehended. Torture was immediate and brutal, and under such duress, confessions flowed freely. Confessions of blasphemy, obscenities, and secret rituals previously unseen by any outsider, which, predictably, only served to enhance their credibility among the populace. Yet, beneath this surface, fissures began to appear. Some accounts depict Templar brethren steadfastly maintaining their innocence, even as they endured the rack or the flames. Certain inquisitors, particularly in Italy and Spain, outright refused to participate in the trials, finding no substantive evidence of heresy. Only frightened men, many elderly, still adhering to their vows of silence, even as their fingernails were excruciatingly removed. If this was a purge, it was an incongruously tumultuous one, and not all aspects of the narrative aligned cohesively. Consider, for instance, the timing. Why did Philip act with such pronounced urgency? The arrest warrant, known as the Secret Order, had been meticulously prepared in clandestine fashion for months. Copies were disseminated across France in sealed envelopes, accompanied by explicit instructions that they were not to be opened until the morning of the raid. Such a level of paranoia suggests either profound apprehension or perhaps the astute awareness that if the Templars received even the slightest forewarning, they would simply disappear. This latter possibility may explain why, according to multiple eyewitness accounts, the Paris temple was mysteriously empty, not devoid of people, but conspicuously devoid of treasure. While royal agents located numerous records, they found no chests of gold, no sacred relics, not even the rumored Ark of the Covenant, which, amusingly, some had genuinely hoped might be concealed there. Instead, they encountered only silence, the kind that implies a destructive fire had raged just long enough to obliterate all prior traces. And it is at this juncture that the historical narrative shifts. For a military order ostensibly rife with heresy, the Templars had somehow maintained centuries of unwavering papal support. From Pope Innocent II's bull in 1139, which granted them exemption from local laws and taxes, to the extensive privileges they subsequently received under Urban III and Honorius III, the Church had significantly invested in their prosperity. Thus, the question arises, why did Clement V capitulate so swiftly when Philip initiated his move? Some historians contend that Clement, himself a Frenchman, was effectively under Philip's dominion. The Pope had been installed under considerable political duress and spent the majority of his papacy maneuvering as a mere pawn on the chessboard of royal influence. Others posit a more ominous explanation, that the Pope possessed knowledge of certain anomalies, that whispers had reached Rome itself concerning arcane texts secreted beneath Templar strongholds, of relics surreptitiously transported, and of rituals predating Christianity. Yet, conclusive proof remained elusive. As the trials protracted, one inconvenient truth persisted. The Templars offered no organized resistance. They did not engage with swords or mount a rebellion. They submitted, even under torture, even unto execution, as if cognizant that resistance would only exacerbate their plight, or as if they firmly believed their silence possessed a power far exceeding any confession. This phenomenon has, understandably, perplexed scholars for centuries. Were they utterly broken, or were they executing a far more protracted strategy? One compelling theory suggests that the order had meticulously developed contingency plans long before the arrests, plans encompassing escape routes, hidden caches, and coded documents plans activated the precise moment the secret order was unsealed. After all, an organization that had navigated the treacherous political landscape of medieval Europe for 2 centuries was, by no measure, naive. This hypothesis leads us back to the unsettling stillness within the Paris temple, the absence of crucial documents, the empty vaults, and the vanished treasure. One might legitimately question whether they had indeed anticipated this eventuality, and if so, what other secrets might they have concealed before the dawn broke? The vanishing fortune. Imagine a ledger, not a dramatically adorned tome, but a pragmatic, ink-stained book resting on a trestle table within a quiet stone chamber in a Templar preceptory. Its pages meticulously recorded names, numbers, and symbols, a comprehensive account of payments dispersed to kings and princes, landowners and merchants, and even ecclesiastical officials. Now, envision that very book, along with all the chests, scrolls, seals, and keys to which it corresponded, simply gone. Not forcibly seized, not consumed by fire, not discovered within a rival vault, but utterly vanished. Such is the inherent challenge of attempting to plunder from a phantom. One cannot rob what is no longer present. When King Philip IV stormed the Paris temple on that infamous October morning, their objective extended beyond merely apprehending heretics. They were in pursuit of a monumental fortune. By 1307, the Knights Templar were widely believed to command one of the largest independent treasuries in Europe. Their holdings included estates throughout France, England, Portugal, and the Holy Land. They received substantial donations in coin, land, and livestock, and provided loans secured by collateral, ranging from entire maritime fleets to royal jewels. Their vaults were rumored to contain not only vast quantities of gold, but also rare relics, encrypted charters, and potentially even sacred artifacts. In essence, they possessed sufficient wealth to destabilize the financial systems of any monarch reckless enough to challenge them. Consequently, Philip desired this treasure. Indeed, he desperately needed it. However, when his men forced open the temple's stone floors and breached its storerooms, they discovered only empty coffers and dust. No gold, no scrolls, merely the stagnant air of an inexplicable absence. And here lies the disquieting truth. To this very day, no one has located the Templar treasure. Not a single coin, not a solitary relic, not one verifiable chest. This predicament raises a question even more pressing than its whereabouts. How did they manage to make it disappear? To comprehend this, one must appreciate the Templars' logistical brilliance. This was not merely a collection of robed warriors wielding swords and espousing vague slogans. The order operated as a transcontinental corporation. They employed a centralized accounting system, utilized letters of credit long before modern banking formalized them, and managed their wealth through intricate layers of redundancy. A donation made in England could be accessed in Acre. A Templar knight could traverse numerous countries and draw funds anywhere without ever physically handling coin. Their system was simultaneously elegant and opaque, an encrypted circulatory network silently channeling resources through the vital arteries of medieval Europe. Therefore, when initial rumors of royal hostility began to emerge, it is not difficult to envision a quiet chain reaction being initiated. Coded missives delivered by hand, assets converted into portable forms, scrolls incinerated by candlelight, and treasures systematically divided and dispersed to secondary locations. The vaults may well have been emptied weeks, or even months, prior to the arrests. It is here that the whispers begin. Within the seldom explored corners of Templar history, persistent suggestions abound that a substantial convoy departed the Paris temple under cover of darkness shortly before the king's strike. Some accounts describe carts laden with sealed chests, escorted by silent, hooded riders. Others allude to ships awaiting them along the Seine, destined for La Rochelle, the order's principal port on the Atlantic coast. However, all these narratives share the core concept of a premeditated flight, driven not by fear or panic, but by meticulous strategy. Further corroborating this hypothesis is the sheer magnitude of what was presumed to be present. The Templars were entrusted with safeguarding royal treasures, including those of foreign monarchs. They commanded revenues from vast farmlands, textile mills, vineyards, and tithes from entire provinces. One estimate suggests that their Paris temple alone housed the modern equivalent of hundreds of millions of dollars. How, then, could such an immense fortune simply vanish? Skeptics contend that it never existed in the first place, asserting that the order's wealth was exaggerated and its assets overvalued. However, this argument does not withstand rigorous scrutiny. We know from extant documents that kings regularly borrowed substantial sums from the Templars. We know that they maintained treasure houses at key preceptories, each secured by rotating guards and robust locks. And we know definitively that Philip expected to seize tangible wealth, and he failed. Moreover, there is the perplexing case of the papal inquiry. Following the arrests, Pope Clement V dispatched investigators to various Templar sites throughout France. Their objective was not to ascertain heresy, but to compile inventories. What they discovered were lists devoid of corresponding items, vaults devoid of contents, and names without discernible destinations, as if the records had been meticulously expurgated or the trails intentionally obscured. It resembled a magician's illusion. One had perceived something, or so it seemed, but now it was gone, and the point of deception remained unclear. Naturally, this level of evasion does not occur spontaneously. It indicates sophisticated coordination, a chain of command that remained intact even as the threat intensified. This leads to one of the more unsettling possibilities, that the treasure was not merely scattered, but moved as a cohesive unit, a single, grand operation directed towards a singular, legendary destination. Many theories propose Portugal, some whisper of the Pyrenees, a few evoke the Holy Land, where the order originated. However, the most persistent and romantically evocative suggestion posits that the treasure was laden onto a fleet of Templar ships and transported westward, beyond the reach of the king and the church, towards an entirely new existence. Before delving into the pursuit of phantom ships and coded scrolls, let us reflect on the profound silence, that eerie emptiness discovered in Paris, the sudden stillness where gleaming gold should have resided, the manner in which flames consumed confessions but left accounts, not answers, untouched. For no matter how deeply one investigates the historical records, this mystery remains unresolved. There is no definitive smoking vault, no final testament, only rumors, strategic misdirections, and a fortune that transmuted into myth the moment the arrests commenced. One might begin to discern the contours of a deliberate plan, a sense that this was not merely a disappearance, but a meticulously engineered design. If the treasure was indeed designed to vanish, then perhaps its eventual return was also part of that grand scheme. Secrets in the Paris Temple Tower. From an external perspective, the Paris Temple presented itself as a formidable structure, a fusion of fortress and monastery. Its towering stone walls, narrow arrow slits, and iron-bound gates proclaimed a building designed to withstand siege, scrutiny, and the relentless passage of time itself. Located within the Marais district of medieval Paris, it served as the Templars' European headquarters, a pivotal center of administrative authority and financial acumen. Yet, its most captivating feature was not overtly visible from the street. It lay concealed within its inner sanctum, a structure known simply as the Tower, tall, square, and robustly silhouetted against the skyline. The Temple Tower was as much a legend as it was a physical location. It was widely believed to house the Order's grand treasury. Behind its thick stone walls, rumors circulated of intricately locked vaults, secret staircases, and even subterranean passages, a place where sacred objects were purportedly safeguarded beneath layers of silence and solid rock. Consequently, when King Philip IV launched his assault, this was the primary target for his agents. They did not proceed to the courtyards or the barracks, but directly to the tower. What they discovered, or rather, what they conspicuously failed to discover, would ignite centuries of enduring suspicion. Eyewitness accounts from the raid describe an absence so absolute it bordered on theatrical. There were no scrolls, no chests, no reliquaries or coffers, no parchment maps adorned with cryptic circles drawn in blood-red ink. Only bare floors and the faint scent of aged wax remained. Curiously, there were no signs of struggle, no broken locks, no fresh damage. It was as if the tower had quietly exhaled its secrets, leaving behind only breathless stone. This raises a peculiar question. How could the most secure repository in France, meticulously guarded by a legendary military order, be emptied without anyone noticing? Unless, of course, its emptying was never intended to be noticed. One prevailing theory suggests that the tower itself was a diversion, and that the true treasure and authentic records were never housed in its upper chambers. Instead, they were purportedly stored beneath. Archaeological notes from 19th century excavations, conducted before the temple's regrettable demolition during Napoleon's renovations, hint at sealed, largely unexplored subterranean passages, entire rooms choked with packed earth and debris. And while no definitive vault was ever located, the layout of the foundation implies a far more intricate substructure than a simple basement. Furthermore, there is the testimony of a certain royal accountant, Guillaume de Nogaret, who supervised the temple's seizure on behalf of Philip. In a letter, he expressed his confusion at the paucity of seized materials, noting that nothing commensurate with the rumors of immense wealth was found. He described the emptiness in terms more poetic than bureaucratic, characterizing the tower as possessing echoes but no voice. More than a few scholars have pondered whether this was merely a metaphor or a subtle coded message. Adding further intrigue, is the curious behavior of Philip's men subsequent to the raid. Rather than publicizing their findings and expected action, after ostensibly exposing a network of heresy and fraud, they maintained a striking silence. Details were suppressed, and inventories were conspicuously edited. Some of the earliest transcripts from the trials reference items that do not appear on official lists: a chalice, a head-shaped reliquary, a scroll bound in leather with wax seals that no one could decipher. Where did these items go? Were they genuinely never found, or were they discovered and then deliberately concealed? There is also the matter of the key holders. According to Templar procedure, no single knight ever possessed all the keys to the treasury. 3 brethren were invariably required, each holding one component of a set, symbolizing unity, discipline, and discretion. However, when Philip's guards arrived, the key holders were conspicuously absent. This could be convenient, or perhaps it was a deliberate strategy. Perhaps the Templars, anticipating the storming of the tower, acted as they were rigorously trained to disappear within the very system they had meticulously crafted. It is noteworthy that the tower had undergone significant renovations in the late 13th century. According to building records recovered from the archives of Saint-Denis, new chambers had been incorporated, including a suspicious inner keep described only in vague architectural terms. Some researchers believe this space contained more than mere coinage, possibly crucial documents or artifacts of profound religious or even magical significance. It is at this juncture that the narrative begins to diverge into more speculative territory. As the flames of Philip's purge intensified, rumors proliferated like weeds in the ashes that the Templars had guarded something originating from the Temple of Solomon, that the true vault was not located in Paris at all, but elsewhere, Gisors perhaps, or the Pyrenees. Furthermore, it was suggested that the tower had been constructed not primarily to store treasure, but to obscure an entrance leading downwards, not upwards, into the earth, into the profound depths of the past. Modern researchers have attempted to reconstruct the tower's layout using fragments of medieval maps and written accounts. None agree on the precise configuration, but most include a stairwell descending to depths beyond the architectural blueprints, allowed a shaft sealed with stone, which curiously was never subsequently reopened. Given that the tower no longer exists, its original site now subsumed by modern Paris, mere pavement and faint ghost lines, visible in aerial photographs, direct verification is impossible. One can stand where it once stood, but the earth itself maintains its counsel, and that is the most frustrating aspect of this mystery. For the emptiness within the Paris Temple Tower was not merely physical, it was intentional. This was not a vault that had been plundered, but a sanctuary that had been meticulously emptied with precision, care, and an almost surgical foresight. The clues were systematically swept away, the documents incinerated, the men silenced, all orchestrated by a system engineered not to fail, but to disappear. The historical record acknowledges this with a kind of embarrassed equivocation. Some historians propose that the treasure was overestimated. Others claim it was quietly absorbed into the French crown over time. However, none can adequately explain the blank pages, the abrupt silence, or the absence of receipts. This was not merely sloppy record-keeping, it was something profoundly different, and it casts a long shadow over subsequent historical accounts. For if the tower served as a misdirection, if the genuine vault was not above ground but beneath it, or even located elsewhere entirely, then every trail of gold and parchment pursued from this point forward is not simply a search for treasure. It is a quest for the perfectly executed deception. The last Grand Master's cryptic words. One would anticipate a condemned man to scream, to plead, to curse the heavens, his king, or perhaps his own misjudgment. However, on a smoke-laden March evening in 1314, Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master of the Knights Templar, exhibited none of these reactions. Instead, as flames began to coil around his feet on an island in the Seine, He stood silently for a moment, then addressed not his captors, but the void itself. What he uttered has resonated through centuries of doubt, suspicion, and folklore. According to the most reliable accounts, de Molay proclaimed that Pope Clement V and King Philip IV, his principal persecutors, would soon join him in judgment before God. And in a twist of poetic cruelty typically reserved for fiction, both men indeed perished within a year, the Pope succumbing to illness, the king from a stroke following a hunting accident. Some observers attributed this to mere coincidence, while others perceived it as a potent curse. However, before venturing into the realm of spectral narratives, let us focus more intently on the scene at the stake. De Molay's execution unfolded on a cold evening, before a gathering crowd on the Îlot Juifs, not far from the imposing shadow of Notre Dame Cathedral. The man who had once commanded a global order of warrior monks stood bound to a wooden pillar, not exhibiting trembling fear, but an unyielding dignity that reportedly unsettled even his adversaries. As the flames consumed him, he uttered a final declaration, words now subject to various translations, but unified in their tone and invocation of justice, a summoning of truth. Yet, no contemporary record precisely documented those exact words. The earliest written versions of de Molay's curse emerged decades later, filtered through the interpretations of monastic chroniclers and political adversaries alike. Some accounts claim he merely extended forgiveness to his captors, echoing a Christ-like grace. Others insist he explicitly named the Pope and King, damning them before the assembled populace. One version even suggests he issued a warning of a far greater reckoning, stating that a shadow hung over Europe and that the Church itself would not escape the consequences of what it had unleashed. This latter version, predictably, seldom appears in standard textbooks. So, what exactly was it? A dying man's vengeful imprecation, a carefully calculated prophecy, or something far more ancient? Some scholars contend that de Molay was reciting a ritual phrase, an integral component of a Templar code designed to trigger specific actions upon his death. The order, after all, was renowned for its profound secrecy. Entire initiation ceremonies remain largely obscured, with only fragmentary descriptions available in inquisitorial transcripts. If de Molay's words constituted a cipher, an audible signal directed to hidden brethren, they may have been received far beyond that Parisian crowd. This theory is often dismissed by mainstream historians, yet it becomes increasingly difficult to disregard when one examines the subsequent timing of events. Within weeks of de Molay's demise, Templar symbols began to surface in unexpected locations. Stone markers, graffiti, and even coinage bearing the Red Cross were observed in regions far removed from direct royal influence. It was as if the flame that consumed the Grand Master had ignited other, quieter fires intended to endure within the shadows. And here lies the subtle convolution that frequently preoccupies conspiracy theorists. According to a little-known document preserved in the archives of Avignon, a sealed letter from de Molay may have been clandestinely smuggled out prior to his execution. It was purportedly delivered to a preceptory in Aragon, one of the few kingdoms at that time still tolerant of the Templars. The contents of this letter have never been publicly disclosed, but a summary written centuries later claims it contained dire warnings, a final testament, and instructions pertaining to the continued survival of that which must remain unseen. Even if that letter never genuinely existed, the ripple effects of de Molay's death are undeniable. The Capetian line, Philip's dynasty, collapsed within a single generation. The papal court was relocated. France entered a period of profound political instability, and the Church never fully regained the absolute authority it once wielded. Coincidence, perhaps, but then again, the Templars were never an organization prone to relying on chance. The psychological impact of de Molay's final words cannot be overstated. Whether interpreted as a curse, a prophecy, or a strategic maneuver, they irrevocably shaped the ensuing narrative. For the assembled witnesses, they transformed the execution from a mere legal act into an act of martyrdom, They recast the king as a villain, the pope as a subservient puppet, and the order, from accused heretics, into victims of profound betrayal, victims, as later legends would assert, who possessed formidable secrets. In the decades that followed, whispers intensified, claiming that de Molay had not only concealed the order's immense treasure, but also its fundamental purpose, that the last Grand Master was the ultimate guardian of knowledge, so perilous it could not be permitted to perish with him, and that in those final, harrowing moments, he did not merely curse his executioners, he activated something profound, perhaps a latent memory, perhaps a clandestine network. One particularly haunting narrative recounts a stone chamber situated beneath the riverbanks where de Molay was executed, and how, amidst the rising flames, a group of hooded figures stood silently in a nearby alley, listening intently. They reportedly moved only once his voice fell silent, retreating into the obscurity of the night. This account, like many others, remains unverified, yet it persists, not merely for its evocative suggestion, but because no one has ever definitively disproven it. There is a chilling poeticism in the manner of de Molay's demise. No sword, no shield, only fire, silence, and a voice speaking into the enveloping darkness. His death marked not only the official termination of the Knights Templar as an institution, but also the genesis of their enduring legend as an eternal mystery. It was a paradoxical moment, where a profound secret was both extinguished and, simultaneously, born anew. And if his final words transcended a mere curse, if they encoded instructions or set in motion a long-prepared chain of events, then the true scope of the story has yet to be fully comprehended. For the voice from the flames was not the end. It may have been the very key to unlocking everything. The lost fleet of La Rochelle, prior to the Inferno reaching Paris, before the sweeping arrests across France, and before Jacques de Molay stood stoically amidst the flames, there were ships' masts, starkly silhouetted against the dawn, sails unfurling as they silently departed westward from the port of La Rochelle. This particular aspect of the narrative does not always appear in historical textbooks. However, among the scattered fragments and footnotes, one detail repeatedly draws the attention of scholars. When King Philip's men arrived at La Rochelle to seize the Templar fleet, it was gone entirely. Not one vessel, not two, but the entire contingent had vanished without a trace. La Rochelle was not merely an ordinary harbor. It served as the Templar maritime hub, a vital artery for trade and transportation between France and the Holy Land. Strategically positioned on the Atlantic coast, it provided deep-water anchorage, robust stone quays, and a meticulously organized logistical system that enabled the order to transport personnel, goods, and correspondence across vast distances with remarkable efficiency. It was a lifeline, protected with the same quiet rigor that characterized all Templar operations. In the weeks preceding the infamous purge of 1307, there were no official warnings, no apparent leaks. The arrest orders were drafted in profound secrecy, distributed in sealed envelopes, and meticulously timed down to the hour. And yet, the fleet was gone. It was as if someone had whispered into the opportune ears just before the storm broke, as if the Templars had sailed away not in fear, but with prescient foresight. So, the question remains, where did they go? According to extant port records, which are maddeningly sparse, the last Templar ships were observed departing under cover of night, approximately 1 week prior to the mass arrests. Witnesses noted a sudden flurry of activity at the docks, crates loaded in silence, officers communicating solely through hand signals, and, peculiarly, horses being brought aboard, an unusual occurrence for what was ostensibly a financial and clerical order. By the time royal agents arrived, the moorings were deserted. A fleet comprising up to 18 vessels had simply evaporated. Modern historians frequently dismiss this anomaly. Perhaps the ships were lost in storms, perhaps they dispersed to smaller ports and were quietly integrated into civilian trade. These are plausible maybes, but none adequately account for the precise coordination, the absence of ledgers, or the profound silence that followed. There was no wreckage, no reported sightings, no definitive accounts of capture. One might recall the discovery of the Paris temple, found nearly empty, imbued with a sense of deliberate removal. This echoes that same pattern, a ghostly logistical network that ceased operation just before the enemy materialized. La Rochelle, therefore, constitutes the most tantalizing piece of this enigmatic puzzle. Maritime records from the nearby port of Bayonne, for instance, note an unusual increase in ship sightings shortly after the fleet's disappearance. Vessels of foreign design, crews that refused to communicate, and ships flying no discernible flags. There is even one account of a ship docking for supplies and making payment with coins stamped with the Templar seal, years after the order had supposedly ceased to exist. Most scholars dismiss these as apocryphal, yet none can entirely explain them away. And here the speculation deepens. If the Templars possessed foreknowledge of their impending destruction, and if they commanded the resources to secretly mobilize an entire fleet, then logic dictates that this fleet had a specific destination, not merely an escape route. It had a plan. Some believe it was Portugal, a nation that would subsequently become remarkably accommodating to former Templars. Others suggest Scotland, a realm of rebellious lords and long-standing antagonisms with both France and the papacy. A few even whisper the name America, though the prevailing historical timeline renders such a voyage highly speculative. However, the significance lies not solely in their destination, but also in what they transported. Some accounts propose they carried the order's immense treasury, melted down and meticulously packed into straw-lined barrels. Others claim the ships bore sacred relics, the Holy Grail, the Ark of the Covenant, or even the severed head of John the Baptist. More conservative theories point to sensitive documents, financial records, political correspondence, or maps etched with encoded symbols. Regardless of the precise contents, the core concept remains clear. The fleet constituted more than a mere evacuation. It was a strategic relocation. And this is where events take a stranger turn. In the early 18th century, a French nobleman named Claude Desprez published a little-known tract referencing the flight of the Grail and a convoy of ships carrying the soul of the temple into the new dusk. His sources were vague, yet his phrasing possessed an oddly poetic quality. It presented the notion that the Templars did not merely escape, they underwent a transformation. The fleet was not a retreat, but a rebirth, sailing into legend under the protective shroud of sea spray and shadow. Even more curiously, later reports from the Canary Islands in the mid-14th century describe locals recounting tales of tall ships bearing crosses on their sails, arriving without warning, exchanging goods, and then vanishing before sunrise. The flags bore no national insignia. The men spoke little but paid generously, and one islander, according to a monk's diary, swore the men possessed tattooed wrists, marked with crosses centered within circles identical to Templar iconography. Again, none of this conclusively proves the fleet's survival. However, it suggests something more unsettling, that the fleet may never have intended to return. There is an idea, both haunting and fragile, that the Templar fleet was not simply a reactive response to Philip's aggression, but the final phase of a long-conceived plan. That the Order, having foreseen the betrayal of kings, initiated an exodus. That the sea served not as an escape route, but as a medium through which something ancient, sacred, or dangerous could be safely transported beyond the reach of empires. If this theory holds true, then the treasure sought may not be interred in the soil. It may still be sailing somewhere, carried not in chests of gold, but within the profound depths of silence. The Portuguese sanctuary, to achieve true disappearance in the 14th century, not merely to conceal oneself in a cave or feign one's demise in a tavern, three critical elements were required: a steadfast ally, a legal loophole, and a location beyond papal scrutiny. The Knights Templar, consistently methodical in their strategies, appear to have identified all three within one remarkable territory: Portugal. Nestled on the western periphery of Europe, Portugal in the early 1300s was a nascent kingdom, fiercely independent yet deeply indebted, particularly to the Templars, who had previously aided King Dinis I in securing his throne. Unlike his French counterpart, Philip IV, King Dinis harbored no inclination toward betrayal. Consequently, when the order faced imminent dissolution in 1307, Portugal became more than a mere sanctuary. It functioned as a strategic reset button. As inquisitions relentlessly swept across France and Spain, and as papal bulls demanded arrests and confessions, the Portuguese court quietly formulated an ingenious solution. In 1319, King Dinis formally petitioned Pope John XXII with a peculiar request: to establish a new order, entirely distinct, of course, that would inherit the lands and responsibilities of the now defunct Templars. This new entity, he proposed, would serve the Church loyally, swear fresh oaths, and defend the faith with both sword and discretion. The Pope granted his assent, and just like that, the Order of Christ was born. Yet, here is where the narrative takes a distinctive turn. The inaugural Grand Master of the Order of Christ was a man named Gil Martins, a former Templar. Its headquarters, the formidable castle of Tomar, had once been the most significant Templar fortress in Portugal. Its structure, hierarchy, and even its symbols bore a striking familiarity. So much so, in fact, that it did not resemble an entirely new order, but rather a seamless continuation under an alternative designation, a meticulously orchestrated metamorphosis that enabled the Templars to endure, while the rest of Europe largely believed them to have been reduced to ashes. This was not mere subterfuge, it was sophisticated bureaucracy. By transferring titles, lands, and assets to the Order of Christ, Portugal effectively preserved the Templars' infrastructure intact. The castles remained garrisoned, the rituals, though modified, persisted, and within a single generation, the Order of Christ evolved into one of the most potent institutions in Iberia, its influence quietly extending beyond national borders through extensive trade and exploration. And what of the treasure? Here, the narrative becomes delightfully ambiguous. While France systematically dismantled monasteries in search of gold and inquisitors kindled fires over parchment maps, Portugal observed in silence. Not a single Templar ship was seized, not one vault was uncovered. If the fabled treasure had indeed been moved to the Atlantic coast, where better to send it than to a secure harbor enjoying royal protection? Some historians posit that at least a portion of the Templar wealth was transferred to Portuguese strongholds, perhaps concealed beneath Tomar or dispersed among smaller, rural estates for safekeeping. More intriguing are the records of unusual shipments arriving at Portuguese ports in the years following 1307. Crates with no declared contents, carts arriving under armed escort, and contracts signed in ciphers that defy modern translation. One chronicler described a rain of relics and silver that quietly blessed the land during that period, perhaps poetically or perhaps literally. Even more compelling is the subsequent trajectory of Portugal in the centuries that followed. This relatively small coastal nation unexpectedly emerged as the vanguard of European exploration. It was the Portuguese who meticulously charted the Atlantic, who pioneered maritime routes to Africa, India, and beyond. At the heart of this wave of expansion stood the Order of Christ. Prince Henry the Navigator, that quintessential figure of discovery, served as a Grand Master of this very order, the same institution born from the ashes of the Templars. Coincidence? Or undeniable continuity? A theory, more often whispered than formally documented, suggests that the age of discovery was not solely fueled by royal ambition or economic impetus, but by a covert mission. That the Portuguese explorers were not merely charting uncharted waters, but following ancient maps. That the Order of Christ's expeditions were less about discovering new worlds and more about reclaiming ancient knowledge that had been meticulously safeguarded by the Templars and transported across oceans during their flight from persecution. This brings us to Tomar. The Convento de Cristo in Tomar is an extraordinarily beautiful and complex structure, a harmonious blend of Romanesque austerity and Manuelian exuberance. However, its focal point, the rotunda, bears unmistakable Templar hallmarks. Inspired by the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, it is more than a mere chapel. It functions as a profound compass, symbols etched into its columns, geometric patterns suggesting celestial alignments, a design intended not merely to inspire devotion, but to encode profound meaning. Some believe that the very layout of Tomar conceals a message, that beneath its tiled corridors and cloisters lies a crypt, a chamber sealed by the passage of time, preserving not wealth but a warning. Perhaps it is here, not in France, Scotland, or the New World, that the true secret was hidden in plain sight, veiled by an outward display of obedience and sanctity. Yet, resistance to this idea persists. Mainstream historians argue that the Order of Christ, while undeniably derivative, was a pragmatic invention. That Portugal's generosity was politically motivated, not conspiratorial. That there is no concrete evidence the Templars transferred anything beyond titles and lands. But then, the absence of evidence does not equate to evidence of absence, particularly when dealing with an organization meticulously trained in the art of silence. The Portuguese sanctuary theory is not solely about escape, it is fundamentally about transformation. The Templars did not vanish, they evolved, they adapted. They whispered a new name to the wind, donned new robes, and swore new vows. But beneath it all, the original purpose endured, to guard something, to await a propitious moment. And within the warm stone of Tomar, where the Atlantic winds still weave through broken archways and light flickers upon centuries-old masonry, one can almost perceive it, that breath held just behind the veil, a secret still slumbering, awaiting perhaps the opportune voice to awaken it. Encoded Grail lore and the treasure map. Some legends exhibit an obstinate refusal to perish, not necessarily because of their factual veracity, but because of their inherent utility. They flicker and transmute, continually reshaping themselves with each successive generation's hopes and fears, and none more profoundly than the legend of the Holy Grail. It has been variously described as a chalice, a sacred bloodline, a mystical stone, a potent symbol, a complex cipher, and in the specific context of the Knights Templar, perhaps an amalgamation of all these interpretations. For inextricably intertwined with their enigmatic history, deeply embedded within the intricate folds of medieval myth and coded manuscripts, lies a tantalizing suggestion that the Templars did not merely safeguard treasure, but rather they guarded profound knowledge, and that this knowledge, meticulously encoded within layers of Grail lore, might still indicate the ultimate resting place of their lost fortune. Let us commence with Chrétien de Troyes, a 12th century poet active in the court of Marie de Champagne. He composed one of the earliest known Grail romances, in which a young knight named Percival inadvertently encounters a mysterious procession, a luminous Grail borne through a castle, followed by a bleeding lance. The text abruptly concludes, unfinished, a dangling mystery that has captivated readers for centuries. However, here lies a curious detail. De Troyes was writing precisely during the zenith of Templar power. Consequently, some scholars believe his work implicitly reflects a coded reference to the Order's secret rituals. The bleeding lance, after all, was a recurring symbol in both early Christian mysticism and Templar artistry, and the Grail, irrespective of its precise nature, is never explicitly delineated as a chalice. Instead, it is depicted as a vessel, a receptacle of sacred power, or perhaps of recondite knowledge. Later, authors further elaborated upon the narrative. Wolfram von Eschenbach introduced the concept that the Grail was not composed of gold, but of a mysterious stone, one purportedly capable of healing wounds, imparting wisdom, and sustaining life. He termed it the lapsit exilis, a phrase defying direct translation yet resonating with evocative energy. Eschenbach also described a clandestine brotherhood sworn to protect the Grail, neither traditional monks nor conventional knights, but an entity occupying an interstitial space. Does this resonate? In his rendition, the Guardians of the Grail reside within a fortress named Monsalvash, a word some believe to be a corrupted iteration of Monsalvat, which in turn has been linked to Montségur in southern France. That name will re-emerge later, but for now, it suffices to acknowledge that the Grail myth became intricately interwoven with real geographical locations, hills, castles, caves, and maps, or more precisely, the concept of maps concealed within narratives. It is at this point that the narrative acquires an even stranger dimension. In the 20th century, a scholar named Trevor Ravenscroft published a controversial work asserting that the Grail legend represented an encoded history of a tangible relic, meticulously preserved through symbolic representation. He argued that the Templars had incorporated these codes into their architecture, manuscripts, and even their liturgical practices. While his work was extensively criticized, it undeniably ignited a renewed interest in the proposition that the Templars were not merely contending for Jerusalem, they were actively seeking something interred beneath it. Then came the alleged discovery of the Templar map, purportedly found within a monastery in northern Spain. The parchment appeared, at first glance, to be a conventional pilgrimage chart. However, when meticulously superimposed over specific Templar holdings, the alignments suggested more than mere coincidence. Certain waypoints, castles, shrines, chapels, corresponded precisely with the celestial positions of stars within the Orion constellation. The theory posited that these sites, interconnected by ancient routes, formed a terrestrial star map, pointing not toward heaven, but towards something concealed within the earth. A pathway, a protective grid, or a definitive vault. Mainstream historians scoffed at this notion. However, researchers subsequently began to observe similar alignments in France, particularly across Languedoc, a region replete with Templar ruins and a rich Cathar history. Even the magnificent Chartres Cathedral, situated miles to the north, was said to align with nearby preceptories, according to a pattern consistent with sacred geometry. The Grail, in this interpretive framework, is not a physical object to be discovered within a cave. It is a complex riddle dispersed across both landscape and legend, a pattern that unveils itself solely to those conversant in its symbolic language. And the Templars, those steadfast custodians of silence, may have been the last individuals fluent in that cryptic tongue. There exist fragmentary, maddeningly incomplete documents that suggest the Templars encrypted messages within their liturgies. One prayer addressed to St. Bernard, their patron, reportedly contains a series of unusual phrasing repetitions that some interpret as a numerical cipher. Another, a carving found in a remote Portuguese chapel, features a sequence of stars and crosses whose angular relationships mirror those found in esoteric alchemical charts. Coincidence, perhaps, but the accumulation of such maybes becomes increasingly difficult to dismiss. If the Grail legend serves as a veil for deeper truths, if it conceals tangible locations, routes, or artifacts, then the Templars' treasure may not consist of a singular accumulation of gold, but rather a complex network of interconnected clues. One such clue resides in a lesser-known manuscript called the Codex Giga, though primarily a biblical text. One marginal note, believed to have been appended by a Templar scribe, mentions a vessel hidden in the mother's bones, a phrase so enigmatic as to be nearly inscrutable. However, some interpret it as a reference to a reliquary interred within an ancient Roman tomb, or perhaps an artifact sealed within the stone foundation of a cathedral, the mother metaphorically representing the church itself. This concept of treasure concealed not behind walls but integrally within them transforms the perception of medieval structures. Every pillar could be a directional indicator, every stained glass motif a clue, every ancient narrative a cipher. Therefore, in pursuing the trail of the lost Templar fortune, one does not commence with a shovel, one commences with a story. One meticulously traces the bleeding lance through the ruins. One deciphers the vessel's trajectory across hills, and through chapels. One examines ancient carvings with an altered perspective and murmurs their forgotten names. For the treasure, if it indeed exists, may not be buried at all. It may be hidden in plain sight, occupying the interstitial space between myth and map. And the Templars, those resolute keepers of silence, may have bequeathed the key not in gold or parchment, but in profound metaphor. The Grail is not what it is commonly perceived to be. It never was. Chartres Cathedral and the geometry code. The initial impression conveyed by Chartres Cathedral is not merely its immense scale, though it undeniably looms imposingly above the surrounding town, nor even its renowned stained glass, which captures the morning sun as if designed to ensnare divine light. Rather, the most profound element that truly arrests one is the overwhelming sensation it evokes. As one traverses the cathedral's shadow and steps into the nave, something intangible shifts. The air thickens, the quality of one's breath changes, and the stone floor beneath feels less like inert rock and more like a deliberate manifestation of purpose. This was not merely a church, it was a message, a cipher meticulously carved into limestone. Chartres Cathedral, completed in the early 13th century, is widely regarded as one of the quintessential masterpieces of Gothic architecture. However, what distinguishes it is not solely its soaring ribbed vaults or intricate rose windows, but its intrinsic geometry, its meticulous layout, the deliberate, almost obsessive application of ratios, alignments, and symmetries. Chartres is not simply beautiful, it is mathematically precise. This precision may explain why some theorists believe the Knights Templar utilized it as a vault, not for gold, but for profound knowledge. To the casual observer, it appears to be merely a cathedral. However, to those who study sacred geometry, it represents a map, a celestial chart, a mirror reflecting hidden universal laws. The nave, for instance, conforms to the golden ratio with unsettling accuracy. The strategic placement of columns echoes planetary distances, and the celebrated labyrinth at its center is not a mere decorative element, but a symbolic pathway, a representation of the pilgrimage to Jerusalem, or perhaps something deeper, a symbolic depiction of the soul's journey through layered secrets. It is at this juncture that the connection to the Templars gains substantial form. During the construction of Chartres, the Templars were at the zenith of their power. They controlled critical trade routes, protected pilgrims, and channeled immense wealth through Europe's spiritual heartlands. Yet, they also engaged in another significant activity. They safeguarded sites deemed sacred, often predating Christianity itself. Chartres, as it happens, was erected atop a far older location. A pre-Christian well, dedicated to a pagan goddess, lies beneath its crypt. The Druids revered this spot as a holy place, a kind of navel of the earth, and the cathedral's builders did not remove it. They meticulously built around it, preserving its ancient sanctity. Why? Because Chartres was not conceived as an act of erasure. It was an exercise in layering, preserving one form of sacredness beneath another. This mirrors the Templars themselves, warriors clad in the robes of monks, guardians of a tradition that many believed extended far deeper than the Crusades. One peculiar detail resides within the stained glass. The renowned Blue Virgin window features not only conventional Christian imagery, but also what appear to be zodiac signs, alchemical emblems, and mathematical symbols not formally recognized by the Church. These were not random embellishments. They were encoded ideas, allusions to a profound synthesis of spiritual and scientific knowledge. Such knowledge the Templars may have encountered in the East and subtly disseminated back into Europe through architectural design and the cathedral's intricate floor plan. It is not merely a cross, it is a detailed diagram. If one draws lines between key points, the altar, the labyrinth, the transepts, one discovers triangles that precisely mirror the angles found in Egyptian pyramids. The east-west axis aligns almost perfectly with the summer solstice sunrise, and some assert that the apse is situated at a harmonic node, a point of acoustic and energetic resonance utilized in ancient structures across the globe. This represents a considerable amount of sophisticated geometry for a group of 13th century masons, unless those masons were not working in isolation. There has been long-standing speculation that the Templars provided more than mere protection during the cathedral's construction. They may have offered financing, materials, and even architectural influence. After all, they controlled quarries, forests, and trade routes, and maintained contact with advanced scholars in Islamic lands where Greek, Roman, and Egyptian mathematics were meticulously preserved and further developed. If the Templars were indeed custodians of ancient knowledge, then perhaps they chose to imprint it permanently in stone. This leads to the concept of the Templar Code. Some researchers believe that sacred buildings such as Chartres contain a hidden language, expressed not through written text, but through precise proportion, meticulous layout, and profound symbolism, a form of silent communication between those who possessed this recondite knowledge. Chartres, in this interpretation, transmutes from a church into a vault, a map, a complex riddle. And its answers are not read, they are traversed. One particularly evocative theory suggests that the labyrinth is a scaled model of the Temple of Jerusalem, that each segment corresponds to a station of sacred memory, and at its center, unmarked, unassuming, almost unnoticed, once lay a copper plate purportedly bearing Templar markings. The plate is now gone, either stolen or removed during the upheavals of subsequent centuries. However, old sketches remain, depicting a symbol resembling a double cross, a rare emblem occasionally associated with inner Templar circles. Coincidence again, perhaps, but the pattern becomes increasingly profound. The cathedral's towers also narrate a story. They are conspicuously asymmetrical, one Gothic, the other Romanesque. Some dismiss this as the natural outcome of staggered construction timelines, but others argue it was intentional, a deliberate representation of duality, symbolizing the twin pillars of Solomon's temple, Boaz and Jachin. This may be a subtle nod to the Templar origin myth, which posits that their founding members excavated beneath the ruins of the first temple, searching not for treasure, but for profound enlightenment. If Chartres serves as a memorial to that original sanctuary, then perhaps its true purpose was not solely religious. Perhaps it functioned as a memory palace, a sophisticated storage device for ancient wisdom, meticulously encoded in light and stone. There are no definitive records directly linking the Templars to the explicit design of Chartres. This forms part of the enduring mystery. However, the patterns are undeniable. The resonance with their iconography, the mathematical perfection, the buried pagan well, and the presence of symbols that would otherwise be incongruous within a church-approved structure. Ultimately, one does not need to accept that a Templar architect meticulously designed Chartres brick by brick. One only needs to stand within the nave, trace one's fingertips along a column, and perceive it, that subtle hum, that pulsating rhythm beneath the stones, a secret not proclaimed aloud, but whispered across centuries, patiently awaiting recognition. The Oak Island Connection. Off the windswept coast of Nova Scotia lies a small, pine-cloaked island, shaped like a teardrop. Quiet, unassuming, barely a discernible mark on most maps, Oak Island has, for over 2 centuries, captivated treasure hunters, adventurers, and conspiracy theorists alike. This fascination stems not from what has been definitively discovered, but from what persistently remains elusive. For beneath its marshy soil, there may lie the most elaborately booby-trapped vault in the world. And, as some believe, it represents the conclusive chapter in the narrative of the Knights Templar. The legend originates in 1795 when a teenager named Daniel McInnes serendipitously encountered a peculiar depression in the ground beneath an ancient oak tree. Accompanied by a few friends and fueled by youthful ambition, he began digging and swiftly unearthed something anomalous. At 10-foot intervals, they encountered layers of logs. At 30 feet, they discovered a flat stone etched with unknown symbols. At 90 feet, they struck a platform, inadvertently triggering a flood trap as water from subterranean channels surged in, inundating the shaft. Thus commenced the enduring mystery of the money pit. Since that initial discovery, innumerable attempts have been made to access whatever lies at the bottom. Expeditions have invested millions into the excavation, tunnels have collapsed, machinery has vanished into the mire. While some dismiss the entire saga as a myth inflated by avarice, others point to a perplexing accumulation of physical clues that resist facile explanation. Among these is the enigmatic stone, now missing for decades, that was found at the 90-foot mark. A transcription of its etched symbols was recorded, purportedly revealing a cipher. Translated, it reads, 40 feet below, £2 million lie buried. However, it is the symbols themselves that pique the most interest. A cross adorned with 4 dots, a triangle bisected by a horizontal line. These identical shapes appear in early Templar carvings, and analogous motifs have been found etched into stones at ruined preceptories in southern France. Then there is the stone cross, located on the island's northern extremity. Roughly hewn yet deliberately placed, it mirrors the distinctive shape of a classic Templar cross, a long vertical arm with a short crossbar, situated within a clearing that appears artificially created. Some consider this mere coincidence. Others believe it to be a deliberate marker, a form of maritime compass indicating something interred not in the island's center, but beneath one of its crescent-shaped shores. The notion that the Templars reached North America before Columbus is, to say the least, highly contentious. However, whispers persist in old maps and ship logs, and, within Masonic lore, tales of a westward voyage of ships that sailed not for safety, but for profound concealment, transporting not treasure, but relics, documents, and knowledge, the very elements that could never be permitted to fall into the hands of king or pope. Oak Island, isolated and readily defensible, would have served as a near-perfect vault. Proponents of the Templar Oak Island theory frequently highlight the intricate structure of the money pit itself, the layered platforms, the water traps, and the sheer complexity of the engineering. It is not merely a hole, it is a meticulously designed construction, one that would have necessitated substantial manpower, sophisticated mathematical understanding, and a symbolic comprehension of protective architecture. In other words, precisely the kind of expertise for which the Templars were renowned. They had demonstrated such capabilities previously in Jerusalem, excavating beneath the Temple Mount, constructing spiral staircases and subterranean chapels. They understood how to conceal objects in plain sight, how to protect through silence and stone. Oak Island, in this context, appears less as a strange anomaly and more as a definitive signature. Furthermore, there is the intriguing discovery of coconut fiber in deep layers within the pit. These fibers are not indigenous to Nova Scotia. They originate from tropical regions, most likely the Caribbean. This raises several disquieting questions. Who transported this material to a remote Canadian island in the 14th or 15th century, and why? No one definitively knows. However, the implication is unsettling. The Templar fleet, it will be recalled, vanished from La Rochelle shortly before the arrests. If some of those ships indeed sailed west long before Columbus or Cabot, then what one discovers on Oak Island might not be mere legend, but tangible evidence. The narrative does not conclude with the pit. In the nearby Smith's Cove, excavations uncovered a U-shaped wooden structure beneath layers of sediment. It was massive, meticulously constructed, and embedded with more of the same coconut fiber. If it was a trap, it was exquisitely engineered. If it was a dock, it was designed for vessels considerably larger than the local fishing boats of the 18th century. Even further inland, researchers located a peculiar triangle carved into stone, pointing due north. Its apex aligns with the cross-shaped clearing on the island's surface, and when mapped in relation to other features, it forms an almost perfect equilateral triangle, a shape sacred to the Templars, symbolizing the divine trinity, the compass, and the blueprint of the universe. Coincidence again? or a form of communication. Skeptics contend that all of this could be attributed to natural formations, overactive imaginations, and the pervasive sunk cost fallacy inherent in multi-generational treasure hunts. After all, despite centuries of excavation, no definitive Templar artifact, no scroll, no coin, no carved relic, unequivocally proclaiming, "We were here," has ever been retrieved. Yet, perhaps that is precisely the point. The Templars did not proclaim, they whispered. They embedded silence into their systems, leaving trails so faint, so profoundly coded, that only those already possessing the answer could truly discern the map. And Oak Island may not represent the prize itself. It may be the ultimate test. For what lies beneath the soil is not merely gold. It is a profound question, one that has resisted every spade, sonar scan, and television crew. A question the Templars may have posed to time itself. If one were to locate the vault, would one even comprehend its contents? Would one know how to properly utilize it? Or would one simply perceive another excavation site? The true treasure, perhaps, lies in the code, the discipline, the intellectual challenge itself. And Oak Island, swaying gently in the northern winds, continues its silent vigil. The Temple Mount excavations. Beneath the sacred skyline of Jerusalem, below the shimmering dome of the rock and the murmur of centuries of prayer, lies something deeper than stone, a profound silence, a void, a buried past that once drew 9 men from the security of European courts into the very heart of danger, devotion, and discovery. For before they became the formidable guardians of banks and castles, the Knights Templar were something far simpler and infinitely more secretive, a group of excavators tunneling beneath the Temple Mount. It is often easy to overlook this foundational origin. Common perception tends to depict the Templars in gleaming armor, brandishing swords on dusty battlefields. However, the earliest records of the order, established around 1119, describe a more curious reality. The founding knights, led by Hugues de Payens, were not initially engaged in military campaigns. Instead, they were quietly granted residence in a wing of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, known during the Crusader era as the Temple of Solomon. For the subsequent 9 years, they scarcely emerged. There are no records of recruitment, no expansion, no significant military engagements, only profound silence and persistent excavation. At least, this is the theory supported by both Arabic and Western historical sources. Chroniclers from that era, including William of Tyre, described the Templars conducting extensive searches beneath the temple. But what exactly were they seeking? Religious historians suggest they pursued relics, the Ark of the Covenant, the menorah of the Second Temple, or perhaps even scrolls containing divine knowledge. Some propose it was a quest less for tangible artifacts, and more for access a subterranean network of tunnels and chambers that could unveil the sacred geography of biblical history. This was not mere fantasy. Modern archaeology has confirmed that beneath the Temple Mount lies a vast network of cisterns, passageways, and sealed chambers. Some date back to the time of Herod, others are older still. During the Templars' tenure, these would have been largely unmapped and untouched by European hands. Yet, remarkably, the order emerged years later exhibiting sudden wealth, rapid papal endorsement, and a reputation that disproportionately exceeded their prior experience. Was this attributable to unwavering faith, political favor, or had they indeed discovered something profound beneath the ancient stones? It is here that the narrative converges with the esoteric. In certain occult texts, often dismissed by academic circles but fiercely upheld by fringe historians, there are allusions to a hidden archive beneath the temple, not a treasure trove in the conventional sense, but a collection of scrolls penned in a pre-Hebrew script, whose contents are attributed by some to the lost tribes of Israel, and by others, more dramatically, to the Nephilim, the mythic giants referenced in Genesis. Whatever their true origin, the central premise remains consistent. The Templars purportedly recovered forbidden knowledge. Not gold, not relics, but knowledge itself, and it may have fundamentally transformed them. Proponents of this theory point to a conspicuous shift in the order's behavior subsequent to their time in Jerusalem. Their financial systems became radically more sophisticated. Their symbols, particularly the distinctive twin rider motif, acquired strange alchemical undertones, and their motto, non nobis domine, non nobis, sed nomini tuo de gloriam, not to us, O Lord, not to us, but to your name give glory, began to appear inscribed alongside peculiar geometries, spirals, intersecting circles, and even veiled pentagrams. Were these indications of heresy, or the subtle echo of something far older? An obscure 18th century manuscript, known as the Rothschild fragment, discovered in the archives of a private library in Frankfurt, describes a sealed chamber found beneath the mount, containing a lattice of stars and a voice without air. The author claims to have copied this note from a now-lost Templar journal retrieved during the Crusades. While unverifiable, the imagery aligns disturbingly well with both Kabbalistic cosmology and early Templar iconography. And here, a small historical fact glows like an ember. The Templars never denied their prolonged presence beneath the mount. They simply never explained it. No detailed logs, no reports to Rome, no preserved scrolls, only a profound silence. Some have speculated that they entered into a pact to protect what they discovered rather than to utilize it directly, that the true legacy of their excavation was not a treasure, but an immense responsibility, a burden, silently passed from night to night, never articulated aloud. This hypothesis could help account for their seemingly disproportionate secrecy and the abrupt hostility exhibited by subsequent church leaders. If the Templars indeed possessed forbidden knowledge, they were not merely heretics, they were profound liabilities. And perhaps this explains why the Vatican, even in modern times, restricts access to certain portions of the Temple Mount's historical records, why several archaeological surveys have been abruptly halted or suppressed, why, in the 1960s, a team of researchers working in the Western Wall tunnels was allegedly redirected when they uncovered a sealed stone doorway, one that has remained unopened since. Could this be where the Templars left something behind, a final chamber, a vault containing not wealth but warnings? The connection to the lost treasure becomes less about physical riches and more about intentionality. If the Templars discovered something beneath the Temple Mount that they deemed too perilous to reveal, something that challenged established doctrine or destabilized royal authority, they would have meticulously hidden it, relocated it, and protected it through the strictest secrecy. That, after all, was their established modus operandi. Thus, the theory emerges. The treasure was not merely gold plundered from Jerusalem. It was knowledge recovered beneath it, knowledge that formed the true foundational system of the Templar Order, nourishing it, shaping it, and ultimately condemning it. For knowledge, when deemed forbidden, inevitably transforms into a curse. And the Templars, perhaps, became its ultimate priests. One can still walk the Temple Mount today. The wind brushes the ancient stones like a whisper. Tourists traverse the same flagstones upon which the Templars once knelt. And beneath their feet, a hollow silence, sealed for centuries, continues to conceal what? A chamber, a vault, a voice without air, still patiently waiting. The Vatican's secret archives. To access the innermost sanctum of the Vatican's archives, one must traverse iron gates beneath papal arms, along winding corridors cooled by centuries of stone. The floors absorb all sound underfoot, behind doors secured by locks, for which only a select few individuals on Earth hold the keys, rests a repository older than most nations, over 50 miles of shelves, manuscripts amassed in layers so dense they seem to murmur amongst themselves, dust-laden letters from emperors, papal bulls sealed in wax, and, somewhere within that echoing darkness, the truth concerning the Knights Templar may be slowly succumbing to mildew. For hundreds of years, the Vatican harbored a profound secret, pertaining not merely to faith, politics, or sacred rituals, but to justice or, more accurately, the conspicuous absence thereof. In 2001, a discreet archivist named Barbara Frail unearthed a forgotten document interred within the index room. It had been filed under an appellation so obscure that it remained miscatalogued for centuries. Its contents were nothing less than the absolution of the Knights Templar. Let us pause here, for this represents a narrative twist that even a novelist might hesitate to invent. The document, now famously recognized as the Chinon parchment, dates back to 1308, merely 1 year after the initial arrests. It meticulously records the findings of 3 cardinals dispatched by Pope Clement V himself, tasked with interrogating the highest-ranking Templar officials. These were not mere low-level knights. These were the individuals who would have possessed comprehensive knowledge, the rituals, the relics, the unvarnished truth. And what they confessed was considerably less than damning. Yes, they acknowledged certain peculiar initiation rites, including ritual kisses and symbolic denials of Christ. However, they framed these practices as misunderstood performances, as spiritual tests, not as heresy, but as allegory. Crucially, they demonstrated genuine repentance, and Clement V, with full cognizance of these testimonies, formally absolved them in writing, affixed with the papal seal. Then, silence. The document was subsequently concealed, misfiled, perhaps deliberately so, while the Church publicly permitted the trials to continue, and while kings seized lands and ignited pyres. The Pope possessed the truth. The Templars had not been damned. They had been forgiven, cleared, rendered spiritually pure before God. And yet, their order was systematically dissolved, their brethren dispersed, their symbols meticulously scraped from chapel walls. Why? Some posit it was an act of profound cowardice. Clement, caught between French political coercion and his own papal authority, capitulated. Others believe it stemmed from a deeper calculation, that the Templars had become excessively powerful, their influence, a de facto shadow government, behind various thrones. Still others whisper that the absolution itself constituted a strategic diversion, a means to preserve the order's inner sanctum, while its external shell was deliberately sacrificed. Whatever the precise truth, the Chinon parchment raises a more fundamental question. What else remains concealed within the Vatican's vast vaults? It is known that the archive encompasses over 85 kilometers of shelving, housing documents spanning 12 centuries. Only a minuscule percentage has been digitized. Access is strictly limited to accredited scholars. No journalists, no curiosity seekers, no spontaneous deathbed confessions are permitted. Even for those who receive permission, numerous documents necessitate additional clearance. Requests can be denied without stated reason, and no individual, regardless of their credentials, possesses unrestricted access to the entirety of the collection. Among the sealed collections are records from the Inquisition, correspondence with ancient monarchs, and papal communications from the Crusader states. If the Templars left behind letters, scrolls, or encoded directives, this is where they would most likely reside, not scattered across European monasteries, but quietly gathered in a stone-lined sepulchre of paper. One tantalizing rumor suggests that during the 16th century, a box labeled Militia Templi was delivered to the Archivum Secretum. Inside, it purportedly contained charters penned in a cipher not observed since the 13th century, along with a hand-drawn map, wax-sealed and unsigned. The box was logged, then subsequently misplaced. To this day, its whereabouts remain unknown, and its very existence unconfirmed. Then there is the rumored Codex Gigas, an alleged manuscript whose existence has never been definitively corroborated, which supposedly outlines clandestine alliances between the Templars and proto-Masonic groups during their final period. Some versions of this story claim it contains references to a geometric cipher of inheritance, meticulously passed down through specific bloodlines and guardians. It, too, is said to reside somewhere within the Vatican, beneath layers of locks that no one can now open. What is undeniably true is that the Church controls the narrative. They possess the scrolls, the ledgers, the trial records. For centuries, they exerted absolute control over the narrative of Templar guilt. And then, with the emergence of a single parchment, that established narrative fractured. For if the Templars were not heretics, if they had been absolved by the Pope himself, then what precisely were they? Victims? Martyrs? Or protectors of something so delicate, so dangerous, that it necessitated complete eradication? The Vatican's sustained silence in this matter often communicates more than words. The slow, deliberate release of declassified documents, the manifest reluctance to speak plainly, even the publication of the Chinon parchment, occurred in a limited Latin edition, with minimal fanfare, as if the Church sought both to acknowledge and simultaneously conceal the truth. Thus, the archive transmutes into a kind of shadow vault, a second temple, constructed not of stone but of parchment and apprehension, a place where knowledge is not destroyed, but meticulously interred. And just like the vaults beneath Jerusalem or the chests that vanished from La Rochelle, it is not what remains unknown that truly haunts, it is what they demonstrably do know. For somewhere behind a Vatican door, secured by a key one may never behold, lies the answer, a folded parchment, a broken seal, a line of text that articulates what none are willing to state. We were wrong, and they knew it. Baphomet, idol or cipher, its name snakes through the pages of medieval Inquisition, records like a persistent whisper that defiantly refuses to dissipate. Baphomet, a word scrawled in trembling ink by tortured hands, reiterated under duress, widely misunderstood by many, and profoundly feared by most. This name became the central pillar of the Templar trials, serving as irrefutable proof, according to their accusers, that the order had succumbed to heresy, to the worship of devils, to the most egregious form of apostasy. Yet, what or who was Baphomet? Was it genuinely an idol of evil, or something far more intricate? Perhaps not even a tangible figure at all, but rather a symbol, or, more accurately, a complex cipher. To truly grasp the gravity of the accusation, one must revisit those initial days of the arrests. When Philip IV's men dragged Templars into dungeons and operated the instruments of torture, one name surfaced repeatedly: Baphomet. Under immense pressure, the men spoke of it. Descriptions, however, varied significantly. Some referred to it as a head, others a face with 3 eyes. A few mentioned a beard or glowing skin, or the uncanny ability to speak without a voice. And therein lies the initial clue. The accounts do not cohere. The descriptions are contradictory. If Baphomet were a literal idol, a physical statue passed from temple to temple, its appearance would have remained consistent to every initiate, but it did not. The image shifted, blurred by pain, suggestion, and the pervasive culture of secrecy, which strongly suggests that Baphomet was not a physical object in the first place. In the ensuing centuries, the word was appropriated by occultists and artists alike. Eliphas Levi famously depicted Baphomet in the 19th century as a goat-headed hermaphrodite, seated in a lotus position, gesturing both upwards and downwards, a visual representation that would later be erroneously conflated with satanic iconography. However, Levi, like many before and after him, was engaging in a form of retroactive myth-making. The original Templars left no such image, no sculpture, no icon, only the word itself. And it is here that the concept of Baphomet as a cipher begins to glimmer. Some linguists have proposed that Baphomet is a phonetic corruption of Muhammad, the old French rendering of the Islamic prophet's name. If accurate, this would imply that the Templars were accused of adopting Islamic practices, an inflammatory suggestion during the Crusades, yet one rooted more in fear than in fact. Others argue it is an intentional anagram. The 18th century mystic Karl Heinrich von Hund und Alten Grottgau suggested it could stand for Templi Omnium Hominum Pacis Abbas, a Latin shorthand for the Father of the Temple of Peace of all men. A lofty title, devoid of evil or heresy, simply inclusive, which, paradoxically, might have been the genuine problem. During their extensive presence in the Holy Land, the Templars maintained substantial contact with Muslim scholars. They translated Arabic texts, acquiring knowledge in navigation, medicine, and architecture. They may even have engaged in the exchange of esoteric knowledge, the kind that was antithetical to the more dogmatic tenets of Christendom. If Baphomet served as a code word for this secret knowledge, a designation for a concept rather than a creature, then the accusations acquire a different interpretive logic. In this perspective, Baphomet transforms not into an idol, but into a mask, a disguise for wisdom considered too perilous to openly name. Not a deity, but a password, a vessel for a philosophy that could not be openly articulated within churches or courts. One tantalizing theory suggests that Baphomet refers to the head of wisdom, a Gnostic concept wherein divine knowledge is personified. In some accounts of the Templar trials, the accused spoke of a severed head possessing prophetic powers, a head that did not speak audibly, but nevertheless answered questions. This resonates with legends from both Islamic and Jewish mysticism, such as the brazen head of medieval folklore or the golem traditions of Prague. Artificial constructs imbued with hidden knowledge, sacred objects utilized for guidance, not control. There is also a darker parallel within the Cathar tradition of southern France, a branch of Gnostic Christianity condemned as heresy. Mentions exist of a talking head maintained by high initiates, a symbol perhaps of wisdom transmitted through suffering. The Cathars, like the Templars, were systematically exterminated by both church and crown. Their fortress at Montségur was besieged in 1244, nearly 60 years prior to the Templar arrests. However, stories persisted that some Templars were present at Montségur's fall, and that a treasure was clandestinely removed before the fires. That a portion of the Templar inheritance originated not from Jerusalem but from Languedoc. Could Baphomet be a residual element of Cathar doctrine, reinterpreted under duress? If so, its significance would be symbolic, a whisper of a faith that perceived the material world as inherently flawed and salvation as an internal process, a belief system that would have profoundly appalled the medieval church, not for its malevolence, but for its direct undermining of their established authority. Another possibility is that Baphomet was simply a red herring, a deliberate misdirection. The Templars, experts in the art of secrecy, may have intentionally invoked false names and symbols to safeguard their true beliefs, much as contemporary spies employ code names and incinerate documents. If Baphomet signified nothing, if it was a cipher for ask no further, then the name itself functioned as a lock. One clue that may offer insight is a fragment discovered in a 14th century Templar chapel in Spain. Etched above a doorway were the letters Baphomet, arranged in a circle. No idol, no explicit explanation, just the words, spaced like a code awaiting decryption. In the centuries since, attempts have been made to decipher it, twisting the name into myriad forms: a goat, a demon, a political slogan. But perhaps, just perhaps, that is the very essence of the enigma. Perhaps Baphomet was never intended to be definitively understood. Perhaps its purpose was to confuse, to mislead, to guard something older, deeper, and more enigmatic. Not a deity, not a monster, but a meticulously crafted mask. And when one endeavors to tear it away, when one strips bare the myths, legends, and pervasive fears, one is left not with a discernible face, but with a profound question. What were they genuinely concealing? The Chinon parchment and papal absolution. Within a small chamber in the Château de Chinon, where tapestries muted the stone walls and ink thickened beneath trembling hands, 3 cardinals sat in solemn audience with the most senior leaders of the Knights Templar. The date was August 17th, 1308. Nearly a year had passed since the commencement of the arrests. The world beyond those walls believed the Templars to be heretics. Yet, here, within this secluded chamber, the truth quietly unfolded onto parchment. No fires, no instruments of torture, only a direct exchange of questions and answers. The sheen on parchment, long interred within the labyrinthine folds of the Vatican's secret archives, and subsequently rediscovered only in the early 21st century, remains one of the most extraordinary documents in medieval history, for it achieved what the public trials never could. It questioned the Templars about their beliefs without the coercive threat of iron or flame, and they articulated their truth. Jacques de Molay, the Grand Master of the Order, Geoffroy de Charny, Preceptor of Normandy, and other senior members one by one, they spoke, not with rage or defiance, but with a weary clarity. Yes, they acknowledged that certain initiation rituals involved symbols and gestures that might appear strange or even irreverent. There was, they stated, a symbolic denial of Christ, but it was allegorical. There was a kiss upon the base of the spine, peculiar indeed, but intended to instill humility and forge bonds. It was, they maintained, an integral part of a spiritual test, an allegory, a rite of passage into discipline, secrecy, and self-sacrifice. There was no Satan, no devil worship, no obscene idol, and no heresy. And here is the crucial detail the world was never permitted to hear. The cardinals, appointed directly by Pope Clement V himself, listened intently. They conferred, they prayed, and then they granted absolution. The sheen on parchment is the physical manifestation of that forgiveness. Penned in Latin and sealed with wax, it explicitly declares that the leaders of the Knights Templar were absolved by the authority of the Pope. Their sins, if indeed they were sins, were expiated. Their souls, by the Church's own hand, were rendered pure. Let the profound implications of this resonate. The Church secretly exonerated the Templars, even as the flames of public accusation burned ever hotter. Even as trials continued protracted in France and elsewhere, even as torture persisted, even as Jacques de Molay was led to the stake in 1314, 6 years after this quiet absolution. While the public was informed he remained an unrepentant heretic, this transcends mere historical hypocrisy. It represents a fundamental fracture, for it implies that the dissolution of the Templar order was not rooted in doctrinal transgression. It was fundamentally a political maneuver. The trial was elaborate theatre, a performance orchestrated by King Philip IV to seize land, erase substantial debts, and neutralize a formidable rival power. And the Church, caught in a vice between truth and its own institutional survival, chose strategic silence. That silence persisted for centuries. The sheen on parchment, initially filed under an erroneous heading, accumulated dust within the Vatican's most secluded corridors. Its rediscovery was not an act of divine revelation, but rather meticulous archival drudgery, a misfiled record, a label that did not quite correspond. And in 2001, it emerged, blinking into the light, astonishing historians and irrevocably rewriting the established narrative. And yet, remarkably, almost no one publicly discusses it. There was no papal press conference, no formal apology, no commemorative monument. The absolution, though officially acknowledged, was treated as a mere historical footnote, too late to aid the deceased, too awkward to integrate into the official narrative, too profoundly inconvenient. However, for those engaged in the pursuit of the lost truth of the Templars, the parchment alters every interpretive framework. For if the order was not culpable, then what precisely were they protecting? What was deemed worthy of enduring imprisonment, torture, and execution without confession? Perhaps the answer resides not in what the Templars overtly did, but in what they adamantly refused to disclose. It is plausible that the Church, by secretly absolving them, was effectively purchasing their silence, that Clement V comprehended the profound stakes, that he had perceived what they had perceived, or at least harbored strong suspicions, that the ritual denials, the alleged idols, the whispered heresies were not blasphemies, but rather symbols of something far older, perhaps even sacred. And this raises a deliciously uncomfortable question. Did the Church absolve the Templars not because they were innocent, but because they were In a deeper sense, correct. Did the Templars possess knowledge too potent for public scrutiny? Something concealed beneath Jerusalem, transmitted through initiations rather than scripture. Something meticulously encoded in geometry, in Grail legends, in the vaults of Chartres, and even within the crosses of Oak Island? If so, then the Chinon parchment is not merely a pardon, it is a profound crack in the dam, a quiet confirmation that the narrative of heresy served as a deceptive mask, and behind that mask stood men who had pledged themselves to something far more profound than mere papal authority. There is one particular line in the parchment that stands out prominently. It refers to the Templar leaders as our sons, a gentle, familial phrase. It conveys compassion, even kinship. The cardinals did not perceive enemies. They saw servants, flawed perhaps, even misguided, but ultimately faithful. And yet, the Church permitted them to burn, which signifies that the truth was not consumed by flames. It was meticulously interred in paper, and not solely in the Chinon parchment. One can only speculate on the multitude of other scrolls, letters, minutes, and testimonies that remain behind locked shelves, misfiled, mislabeled, patiently awaiting a historian with an abundance of curiosity and an insufficient measure of caution. For this is the nature of silence. It does not always denote absence. Sometimes it is the most deafening sound in the room. And upon reading the Chinon parchment, one does not perceive condemnation. One perceives guilt, but not the Templars. Theirs, perhaps, was the sin of trust. The true guilt belongs to those who knew the truth and chose to bury it. The Rennes, Le Château Enigma, high in the Languedoc region of southern France, perched upon a sun-baked hill, permeated by the scent of cypress and thyme, stands a village so diminutive it scarcely warrants a dot on most maps. Rennes-le-Château, sleepy, isolated, quiet. Yet, beneath its cobblestone silence lies one of the most enduring enigmas of the past 2 centuries, one that intricately intertwines priestly secrets, sudden affluence, coded parchments, and, most provocatively, the enduring shadow of the Knights Templar. It commences, as many unsettling narratives do, with the acquisition of wealth. In 1885, a humble parish priest named Berenger Saunier arrived in Rennes-le-Château to assume a forgotten post within a crumbling church. The village was impoverished, the rectory leaked, and the altar was dilapidated. For his initial years, Saunier lived in penury, sustained by meager donations. Then, abruptly, everything transformed. In 1891, during minor renovations to the Church of St. Mary Magdalene, Saunier reportedly discovered a hollow pillar near the altar. Inside, he found sealed scrolls, parchments that were never publicly disclosed, but which appeared to revolutionize his fortunes overnight, not over a decade or even years, but almost instantaneously. Soon thereafter, Saunier commenced frequent journeys to Paris, engaging with bishops, archivists, and, some whisper, clandestine societies. Upon his return, he was conspicuously wealthy, lavishly so. He constructed a new estate, complete with a library tower, an orangery, terraced gardens, and a private chapel. He financed village improvements and commissioned elaborate art. He hosted lavish dinner parties for select guests. All of this transpired on a priest's modest salary. Naturally, questions arose, and Saunier steadfastly refused to answer them. Officially, he asserted his wealth originated from selling masses, thousands upon thousands of them, often to parishioners he never personally encountered. However, the mathematics proved irreconcilable. He would have needed to celebrate multiple masses daily for decades, and many of the records appeared fabricated. When the church initiated an investigation, they discovered, well, sufficient evidence to censure him, but insufficient grounds for arrest. Yet, no one could definitively explain the source of his money or the precise contents of those scrolls. It is at this point that events begin to spiral into deeper speculation. Decades later, researchers unearthed tantalizing hints embedded in archives, marginalia, and cryptic correspondence, linking Saunier's discovery to the Templars. Some theorists believe the parchments referenced genealogy's ancient bloodlines. Others suggest they contained maps. The most persistent theory posits that the priest uncovered documents proving the existence of a hidden treasure, possibly Templar in origin, or even older, concealed beneath or in the vicinity of Rennes-le-Château. This may seem preposterous, but a closer examination of the symbols etched into the church Saunier meticulously rebuilt reveals a compelling pattern. The stations of the cross are arranged out of conventional sequence. The altar is flanked not by saints, but by demonic figures. And at the entrance stands a statue of Asmodeus, the demon of secrets, cradling a holy water font, an undeniably unconventional Catholic design. The inscriptions, too, are peculiar. Latin phrases with deliberate double meanings, geometric patterns in stained glass, and hidden allusions to Mary Magdalene, a significant figure in Templar lore, particularly among those who believe she bore Christ's bloodline. The entire church, therefore, transforms from a place of worship into an intricate puzzle box, designed not for spiritual conversion, but for profound concealment. Some have advanced further, suggesting that Rennes-le-Château rests atop a far older network of caves and tunnels, that the region, once a Cathar stronghold, constituted part of a larger spiritual and political resistance, that the Templars, perhaps survivors of Montségur or exiles from Jerusalem, utilized this hilltop village as a repository, a secure lockbox for secrets they could no longer openly safeguard. One local legend recounts a knight cloaked in white, appearing every 7 years near the church, silently traversing the same path at dusk. No one engages him in conversation. He remains mute, then vanishes. A ghost, perhaps, or a recurring ritual, a reminder. Naturally, skeptics point to simpler explanations, that Saunier was a charlatan, that the treasure was a fabrication, and that the entire mystery constitutes a tourist attraction spun from coincidence and humanity's innate tendency to perceive patterns. However, skeptics struggle to account for the sudden acquisition of immense wealth, the existence of coded documents, or why several researchers connected to the Rennes mystery have met untimely ends under unusual circumstances: car crashes, suicides, sudden heart attacks. Most unsettling of all, in 1967, a local historian named Noël Corbu, who had claimed Saunier found the treasure of Blanche of Castile, died in a car crash mere days before intending to reveal his final findings. Perhaps it is all coincidence, or perhaps the treasure is not gold. Perhaps it is knowledge, the same kind of knowledge the Templars were accused of concealing: genealogies, bloodlines, an alternative narrative of Christ. A record that, if made public, would irrevocably dismantle centuries of ecclesiastical power. This theory gained significant traction in the 1982, with the publication of a series of books, some scholarly, others sensational, connecting Rennes-le-Château to a shadowy organization known as the Priory of Sion. According to these authors, the Templars were merely one strand in a far longer tapestry, part of a lineage of guardians, meticulously preserving a secret too formidable for kings or popes to wield. And what became of Saunier? He died in 1917, steadfastly refusing to disclose his secret, even after being excommunicated and quietly interred. His estate was bequeathed to his housekeeper, who lived in silence and poverty, despite reportedly possessing comprehensive knowledge of the enigma. On her deathbed, she confided to a friend that it would blow the world apart. She never specified what it was, and so the puzzle persists. A priest acquiring sudden wealth, scrolls that vanished, a village pulsating with ancient stone and profound silence, Templar symbols embedded in mortar, codes concealed in hymnals, a church meticulously rebuilt as a riddle. Rennes-le-Château may not harbor the Templar treasure in the traditional sense. No chests, no gold, but it may contain something far more valuable: proof that the historical narrative presented to us is incomplete. The Rosslyn Chapel blueprint. The stone within Rosslyn Chapel does not merely whisper, it resonates. Perched just outside Edinburgh, amidst the verdant expanse of Midlothian, this 15th century church appears almost excessively intricate, too knowing for its era. Its walls are alive with meticulously carved figures, angels, demons, intertwining vines, musicians, and shapes that defy straightforward Christian interpretation. It feels less like a conventional chapel and more akin to a manuscript meticulously inscribed in stone. And for those engaged in pursuing the final chapters of the Templar mystery, Rosslyn is not merely beautiful, it possesses a disconcerting familiarity. For within its intricate confines, some believe, lies the last intact expression of Templar symbology, a profound blueprint etched in silence, preserving the ultimate layers of a lost tradition. Let us begin with the constructors. Rosslyn Chapel was commissioned by William Sinclair, 1st Earl of Caithness, around 1446. A nobleman, certainly, but also a direct descendant of the powerful Sinclair family, whose enduring links to the Freemasons, the Crusades, and the Knights Templar ripple through successive generations. While the chapel's construction occurred well after the official suppression of the Templars in 1307, its design, its iconography, and its underlying geometry evoke an impression of far greater antiquity. Within the Lady Chapel alone, over 110 green men figures with faces wreathed in vines, their eyes half closed in an almost trance-like state, leer from walls and corners. Are these pagan fertility symbols? Or are they rather guardians of a deeper, concealed code? These figures are not merely decorative. Their placement is deliberate, their number conspicuously odd, even excessive. They physically crowd the viewer, they watch. And then there is the apprentice pillar, tall, spiraled, and exquisitely baroque in its delicate carving. It stands apart from all others, strikingly resembling a DNA helix, long before such a structure could have been scientifically comprehended. Legend asserts it was carved by a young apprentice during the master mason's absence. Upon returning and beholding the pillar's perfection, the master, in a fit of profound jealousy, murdered the boy. While the narrative is sufficiently Gothic, esoteric scholars point to a deeper meaning, that the pillar contains a secret meticulously encoded in its ratios and spirals, signifying that it is more than a mere structural support. It is a profound memory of something ancient, something transported across oceans and through ages. Many believe Rosslyn was designed not as a conventional place of worship, but as a veritable library of stone, a cathedral composed entirely of symbols. Its geometric layout, for instance, has been demonstrated to mirror dimensions and proportions found within the Temple of Solomon. This is no mere accident. The Templars, named for that very temple, held its proportions in profound reverence. If they sought to securely encode their knowledge within a Christian society that had condemned them as heretics, what superior method existed than through the subtle language of sacred architecture? One of the most renowned and mysterious carvings within Rosslyn is the so-called musical cubes. Over 200 small boxes adorn the arches of the chapel, each containing a unique geometric symbol. In 2005, a father and son team of musicians claimed to have deciphered them, producing a hauntingly medieval melody, which they believed the masons had meticulously embedded into the stone. While critics debate the absolute validity of this claim, the very concept that music could be encrypted into stone by masons connected to the Templars is undeniably consistent with their known character. And it is not solely geometry and melody. The chapel also features carvings that appear astonishingly anachronistic for 15th century Europe, depictions of corn, aloe, and cacti plants indigenous to the Americas, meticulously etched into stone decades before Columbus's documented voyage. Skeptics attribute these to stylized artistic choices. Believers perceive them as compelling evidence of transatlantic contact. And if the Templars, whose fleet vanished from La Rochelle, indeed sailed westward, Is it truly inconceivable that knowledge of foreign flora returned with them? Furthermore, there is the enduring legend of the underground vault. Local lore insists that beneath Rosslyn lies a sealed chamber, purportedly housing not only the remains of the Sinclair ancestors, but also artifacts brought from the Holy Land. Some whisper of the Grail, others suggest ancient scrolls, sacred relics, or even the mummified head of Christ himself. While no excavation has definitively confirmed these claims, ground-penetrating radar conducted in the 1990 seconds did identify anomalies, unexplored cavities, sealed beneath layers of stone. Predictably, excavation was not permitted, some citing preservation, others fearing the immense political ramifications if anything unorthodox were discovered. There is a curious historical nuance here. William Sinclair, the chapel's patron, passed away before the structure was fully completed. His descendants subsequently shifted their focus, abandoning the original expansion plans. The chapel thus became a self-contained shrine, frozen mid-conception. Some argue this was an intentional choice, that the message was already complete, that the design, unfinished above ground, was secretly continued below. And what of the Templar cross? In several locations throughout Rosslyn, the familiar cross pate appears symmetrical, with arms rounded at the ends, a recognized emblem of the Templar order. While it might be dismissed as generic Christian ornamentation, the frequency and prominence of this motif here, combined with the other anomalous elements, demands a more thorough examination. Let us briefly recall the Templar concept of the Great Work, a philosophical idea extending beyond crusades and coinage. For them, the journey was alchemical, spiritual, the meticulous accumulation of sacred knowledge, and the profound responsibility to protect it. If Rosslyn represents their final whisper, then the chapel is more than a mere tribute. It is an act of encryption, a space where stone retains memory, where light imbues meaning, and where silence encapsulates the echoes of vanished voices. Those who have stood within Rosslyn frequently recount an uncanny calm, the way the structure seems to subtly hum beneath conscious perception, as if something patiently awaits. Perhaps it always has. For Rosslyn does not proclaim. It never did. It murmurs in code. It coils like the spiral pillar, folds like the ivy around the green men, and stretches through time like notes trapped in stone. It communicates, for those who are receptive, that we are not gone. We are merely hidden. Secret societies and Masonic links. If the Knights Templar ostensibly vanished in the early 14th century, then a critical directive must have been omitted, for their symbols never truly departed. They merely transmuted, shifting from formidable stone chapels to the intimacy of candlelight lodges, from crusader banners to meticulously embroidered aprons, from the thunderous roar of battlefield processions to the measured, deliberate cadence of ritualistic steps on polished hardwood floors. The fundamental question is not whether the Templars secretly survived. It is how profoundly they embedded themselves within the cultural fabric of their successors, and whether, just beneath the visible surface, their influence continues to subtly operate. The most compelling evidence of their enduring afterlife is discernible within the rituals, symbols, and mythologies of Freemasonry. Officially, Freemasonry vehemently denies any direct Templar lineage. Its standard historical narrative traces its origins to medieval stonemasons' guilds, those itinerant artisans responsible for constructing Europe's magnificent cathedrals, including Chartres, York Minster, and Rosslyn Chapel. However, this narrative, while ostensibly neat, begins to blur under critical scrutiny. For by the 18th century, Masonic lodges across Europe were abruptly saturated with overt references to the Knights Templar. Ceremonies invoking Jerusalem, regalia bearing distinct red crosses, and degrees with names such as Knight of the Temple. This integration did not occur gradually. It surged with remarkable rapidity. One of the earliest and most influential of these Masonic adaptations was the Rite of Strict Observance, which emerged in Germany in the mid-1700s. It controversially asserted that all Masons were secretly accountable to hidden, unknown superiors, purported direct descendants of the Templar hierarchy. The rite unequivocally insisted that the Templars had not been eradicated, but merely driven underground, and that they continued their sacred mission veiled by a new organizational structure. Peculiar, certainly, but strangely consistent, particularly considering the sudden, widespread adoption of Templar law across Masonic systems in France, Scotland, and even the nascent United States. By the late 1700s, it appeared that nearly every other Masonic lodge incorporated some variation of a Templar degree, and this was not merely symbolic nostalgia. These degrees encompassed initiation rituals evocative of medieval chivalry, solemn oaths of silence, allusions to ancient treasure, and, even more suspiciously, restorationist language, as if their purpose was to preserve something, to meticulously prepare for a future resurgence. In Edinburgh and Paris, surviving Templar documents were meticulously copied, referenced, and even exhibited as revered relics. In Lisbon, the Order of Christ, the direct successor to the Portuguese Templars, lent its distinct symbolism to emerging Masonic branches. And in Rome, murmurs began to circulate that certain members of the church's inner circles were observing these revivals with a palpable unease. After all, if the Templars had truly vanished, why were their secrets still pulsating vibrantly within the clandestine gatherings of men in darkened rooms? One particularly tantalizing connection appears within the Scottish Rite, one of the most widespread branches of Freemasonry today. Its 30th through 33rd degrees explicitly reference the destruction of the Templars, the unjust persecution perpetrated by church and crown, and the concept of spiritual resurrection. In these degrees, the initiate symbolically assumes the mantle of the fallen knights, not merely to commemorate, but to actively rebuild. This leads to a question that challenges the boundaries of credibility. Did the Templars intentionally embed themselves? It is not an impossibility, if one accepts that some members survived the purge, and if they genuinely believed their mission was sacred, perhaps even esoteric, then secrecy represented their most potent tool. They commanded extensive networks, intricate codes, and profound architectural knowledge. They could have strategically planted messages within cathedrals, dispersed scrolls across monasteries, and meticulously trained their successors through the subtle languages of metaphor and stone. And what, fundamentally, is Freemasonry, if not metaphor, meticulously transmuted into structured ritual? Consider the compass and square. Ostensibly tools of the Mason's craft, they also profoundly represent balance, order, and creation, the very principles echoed in Templar texts. Texts that articulate concepts of the inner fortress and the metaphorical building of the soul in stone. Consider the pervasive emphasis on initiation, secrecy, and fraternity, the deliberate utilization of geometry, astrology, and even biblical codes. These are not novel concepts, they are inherited ones. One overlooked document, the Charter of L'arminius, purports to be a 14th century succession list of Templar Grand Masters subsequent to Jacques de Molay. While its authenticity is widely disputed, its intricate detail is striking. The charter outlines an unbroken chain of secret leadership extending into the Renaissance and beyond. If genuine, it would constitute irrefutable proof that the order never perished. It merely altered its outward appearance. And then there is the American connection. In 1791, the Knights Templar were formally re-established in the nascent United States, not as a military order, but as a specific Masonic degree. Among its earliest members were founding fathers, including George Washington. While there is no definitive proof that Washington considered himself a Templar, his extensive Masonic involvement is thoroughly documented. He laid the cornerstone of the U.S. Point capital in full regalia, utilizing rituals deeply steeped in allegory. Was this mere ceremony, or was it a continuation? This persistent thread of ancient knowledge, clandestinely smuggled forward through Freemasonry, may represent the most crucial clue of all. For the treasure of the Templars may never have been gold. It may have comprised ideas, practices, and maps of consciousness meticulously concealed within ritual, passed on not through bloodline, but through fraternal bond, whispered, protected, and preserved. And in Masonic lodges throughout the world, those very rituals continue to be practiced with candles, with codes, and with profound reverence. This does not definitively establish a grand conspiracy. It demonstrates something more subtle, that symbols do not expire when orders fall. That knowledge endures as long as someone remembers to construct a room, secure the door, and articulate it aloud. Perhaps that is the true secret of the Templars. Not mere survival, but enduring transmission. The Swiss banking origin theory. They were undeniably warriors, monks, and pilgrims. However, perhaps the most profoundly underestimated role played by the Knights Templar was that of pioneering bankers, innovators of a system so remarkably advanced that it fundamentally reshaped the financial infrastructure of Europe. And while their swords were melted, their order systematically shattered, and their symbols dispersed, something truly curious may have endured. Not within the ruins of ancient preceptories or the silence of abandoned chapels, but within vaults, ledgers, and institutions where wealth transacts in silence and identities are shielded behind layers of meticulous discretion. In Switzerland, yes, Switzerland, the land of majestic alpine peaks, exquisitely crafted timepieces, and notoriously untraceable accounts, a nation renowned for its neutrality, discretion, and understated power. However, rewind the chronological clock by 7 centuries, and the territory that would eventually coalesce into modern Switzerland was less a unified nation and more a diverse mosaic of canton states caught between vying empires, mercenary forces, and formidable mountain ranges. This historical context makes one particular pattern emerge with the clarity of a beacon in dense fog, the uncanny resemblance between Templar financial innovations and the systems subsequently formalized in Swiss banking. Let us commence with established facts. The Templars developed the first truly international banking network in medieval Europe. Pilgrims en route to the Holy Land could deposit funds at a Templar commandery, for instance, in London, and seamlessly withdraw them in Jerusalem, thereby eliminating the necessity of physically transporting gold across bandit-infested terrain. They innovated letters of credit, sophisticated transfer notes, and systems of encrypted bookkeeping. Their financial influence extended geographically from Portugal to Cyprus, and from Ireland to Antioch. Then, according to the official historical narrative, it vanished. However, here lies the peculiar aspect. Subsequent to the order's dissolution in 1307, substantial portions of their land and infrastructure were seized by local governments or transferred to the Knights Hospitaller. Yet, numerous smaller commanderies situated in the Alpine regions, particularly within what is now Switzerland, simply receded from overt view. Some were quietly repurposed, others were never officially claimed, and in a few instances, the original occupants appear to have remained, albeit under different designations. Fast forward to the 14th and 15th centuries, and a strange phenomenon emerges. Swiss cantons began establishing institutions with a pronounced focus on confidentiality, decentralized management, and the secure storage of gold. These were not yet banks in the contemporary sense, but rather proto-structures, mechanisms for safeguarding wealth, managing transactions, and, crucially, protecting identity. These foundational principles would later become axiomatic to Swiss banking: the paramount emphasis on secrecy, the symbolic neutrality, the use of numbered accounts. And who, precisely, was instructing them in these methodologies? There are no definitive records, no explicit founding charters bearing Templar signatures. However, regional tax documents from the 1322 indicate sudden influxes of wealth into areas such as Lausanne, Basel, and Geneva, locations that had either previously hosted Templar outposts or were situated within a few days' ride of them. Coinage patterns shift. Property transfers occur in large volumes, often directed to shadowy religious groups or unnamed brotherhoods. Furthermore, there is the peculiar case of the Compagnie des Templiers, referenced in a 1357 letter from the canton of Vaud. The document alludes to a company of trusted men preserving the ancient customs of lending and receiving, operating under ecclesiastical license. It was never formally associated with the Templars, yet the name, the timing, and the methods all resonate significantly. It is also pertinent to note that Switzerland remained conspicuously uninvolved in the widespread arrest and persecution of the Templars. While France, England, and Italy pursued brutal purges, the Alpine valleys remained remarkably quiet. No major trials, no burnings at the stake, no significant seizures of wealth, only profound silence. Either the Templars held no assets there, which is highly improbable, or someone meticulously ensured that matters remained discreet. By the 15th century, Swiss financial institutions had begun to formalize into structures that, by the 18th and 19th centuries, would become globally renowned for their unparalleled secrecy and security. Their emblem, the white cross on red, while not identical to the Templar red cross on white, exhibits a strong visual echo nonetheless, and their core principles, discretion, neutrality, anonymity, are values that could have emerged from a profound religious necessity or been meticulously instilled by an older brotherhood adept at surviving betrayal. Naturally, skeptics scoff at these connections. They highlight the vast chronological gap between Templar suppression and modern Swiss banking. They cite the absence of explicit written links. They contend that banking systems evolve organically, responding to inherent social and economic pressures, and they are partially correct. However, the persistence of certain techniques, the use of cryptographic symbols in early account ledgers, the meticulous protection of non-local wealth, the fortress-like mentality of Swiss vaults suggests something beyond mere organic growth. It hints at inheritance, perhaps not a deliberate legacy, but a practical one. Skills transmitted, disciplines remembered, a blueprint never entirely erased. There is also the Masonic dimension. Many of the early Swiss banking families, such as the Fuggers, Lombards, and Neckers, possessed connections to fraternal organizations, exhibiting strong, structural, and symbolic parallels to both Freemasonry and Templar traditions. Shared architectural motifs, similar ritualistic language, an obsessive preoccupation with numerology, and the profound concept that money is not merely a tool, but a fundamental structure capable of conferring both freedom and control. And then there is the gold. To this day, a curious quantity of unclaimed or historically ambiguous bullion resides in Swiss vaults, its origins intricately entangled in centuries of private transfers. Some of it, admittedly, constitutes spoils of war or inheritance from defunct empires. However, a portion of it predates modern banking entirely, bars stamped with unknown sigils, untouched by contemporary tracking methods. One particular bar, purportedly recovered from a flooded vault in Zurich, bore a faint cross-pâté, deeply worn but unmistakably present. No mint mark, no date, only profound silence. The discovery was never officially authenticated. Perhaps that is for the best. For if one acknowledges that the Templars preserved their wealth, their discipline, and their methods beyond their apparent demise, if one accepts that their legacy continued within the gold-backed stillness of Swiss banking, then one must also inquire what else truly survived. And what precisely are we still not permitted to know? The curse of the Capet kings. On a smoke-shrouded Parisian night in March 1314, Jacques de Molay stood chained to a wooden stake, his gaze fixed not on the assembled crowd, but on something beyond it. As flames began to coil upwards, he did not scream, he did not plead. Instead, he spoke calmly, forcefully, and, as legend asserts, with terrible precision. Clement, he is reputed to have warned, "You will answer to God within 40 days, and Philip within a year." Then, the fire consumed him. Initially, no one regarded these words with serious intent. But then, Pope Clement V died within a month, purportedly from a stomach illness, followed swiftly by King Philip IV, who perished by the end of the year from a stroke subsequent to a hunting accident. And over the ensuing generation, the remainder of the Capetian line, France's ruling dynasty, crumbled like ancient parchment. One by one, Philip's sons succumbed under mysterious circumstances. Louis X suffered an illness after a brief and troubled reign. Philip V followed suit, and Charles IV died without a male heir. Within 14 years, the direct lineage of the Capetian kings, one of the most powerful royal dynasties in Europe, had utterly collapsed. A lineage that had ruled since 987, extinguished. Coincidence or a curse? This chilling sequence became known in whispers and chronicles alike as the Curse of the Templars. And while historians frequently scoff at such labels, even the most secular among them concede that something profoundly anomalous occurred. Few dynasties experience such a concentrated implosion without the impetus of war or assassination. Yet, the Capetians simply withered. Some interpret it as poetic justice, others as divine retribution. However, for those who perceive the deeper currents of Templar history, the so-called curse may not have been supernatural at all. It may have been a meticulously activated warning, a signal set in motion long before the pyres were even constructed. Consider this: the Templars had decades, indeed centuries, to embed themselves throughout Europe. They controlled vast lands, ships, ports, and extensive networks of loyal brethren. They transmitted information with surgical precision. They possessed a profound understanding of how to construct and how to dismantle complex systems. If they foresaw betrayal, perhaps they prepared more than mere escape routes. Perhaps they orchestrated a slow, deliberate unraveling. The Capetians, after all, were not simply adversaries. They were profound traitors. King Philip IV had borrowed heavily from the Templars, funding wars and financing extravagances, only to turn on them the moment repayment became inconvenient. By destroying the order, he presumably believed he was erasing the debt. But what if the order had a contingency plan? Some believe they did. An obscure letter preserved in the archives of Avignon allegedly references a black protocol issued by a council of senior Templars in 1306. The document's authenticity has never been verified, and its contents remain largely speculative. However, according to legend, it outlined specific measures to be enacted if the order were ever betrayed by the crown. These measures purportedly included financial sabotage, the calculated dissemination of damaging political rumors, and, most eerily, the removal of blessings. The latter phrase is vague, but within the medieval mindset, the act of removing a blessing could be synonymous with imposing a curse not through spellcasting, but by systematically withdrawing protections, withholding alliances, exposing vulnerabilities, and collapsing structures from within. It should not be forgotten that the Templars were insiders. They possessed intimate knowledge of the operational mechanics of the French crown. They understood who it paid, who it owed, and who it feared. If they sought to turn the system against itself, they could achieve this through subtle nudges, a bribe here, a whispered rumor there, a strategically poisoned alliance. And when the king died, it would appear to be an act of fate. But some contend it extended beyond mere political machinations. The Capetians had long positioned themselves as God's chosen rulers. Their power was meticulously reinforced by papal support and elaborate ritual pageantry. If the Templars discovered something that fundamentally undermined that divine right, some ancient document, some genealogy, some forbidden truth, and ensured that such knowledge reached the appropriate ears, the dynasty would rot from the inside, not through fire, but through insidious doubt. There is also the possibility that the curse was primarily psychological. In the aftermath of de Molay's death, stories of his final words propagated rapidly. Even among those who disbelieved in curses, the timing was remarkably difficult to dismiss. And as the Capetian fortunes began to wane, rumors infected the nobility, superstition metastasized. Kings began to fear for their own bloodline. They questioned their advisors, they suffered sleepless nights. And in a world where power was as much about perception as it was about governance, fear could be fatally corrosive. The Templars may have crafted that fear with surgical precision. Another unsettling historical footnote: the 100 Years' War, one of Europe's most devastating and protracted conflicts, commenced precisely after the Capetian line ended. The death of Charles IV, without a direct male heir, triggered a succession crisis that pitted France and England against each other for over a century. What greater revenge than to plunge your enemy's descendants into prolonged chaos? Even now, long after the smoke has dissipated, long after the Capetians are reduced to mere historical footnotes, the concept of the Templar curse remains vividly alive, not in spellbooks or hexes, but in the quiet collapse of a throne, in the manner in which truth, when weaponized, becomes sharper than any steel. For a curse does not require magic, it merely requires inevitability. And when one examines the precise and poetically tragic unraveling of the Capetian dynasty, one cannot help but wonder whether Jacques de Molay's final words were not a prophecy, but a meticulously planned schedule. The Templar cross in the New World. It is tempting to dismiss the notion outright, a red cross on white in the New World. Such a suggestion implies that the Templars, those medieval warrior monks in chainmail, somehow traversed the Atlantic a century prior to Columbus. This theory is largely absent from most textbooks, and is typically met with polite skepticism by mainstream historians. However, once one begins to discern the symbols carved into stone, etched on maps, woven into local legends, it becomes increasingly difficult to disregard. For the Templar cross, the unmistakable flared pate seems to appear persistently where it should not. Let us commence in Nova Scotia, specifically on Oak Island, but also extending beyond it. Scattered along the Canadian coastline are early stone markers, most weathered into anonymity, yet a few remain distinct. One in particular, discovered near a bay long utilized by Mi'kmaq fishermen, bears the faint outline of a cross pate, discernible only when the sun strikes it at a precise angle. It is not a conventional Catholic cross. Its symmetry and precision are too pronounced, and it predates formal colonization. Next, consider the American Northeast, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New Hampshire. In these wooded enclaves, early colonial explorers occasionally recorded peculiar findings, symbols carved into trees and rocks. Most were initially presumed to be indigenous in origin until the 19th century, when some antiquarians began comparing them to European crusader marks. The correlation was not always perfect, but one distinct shape recurred: the equal-armed cross with flared ends. In Newport, Rhode Island, stands an enigmatic stone structure known as the Newport Tower. It resembles a windmill, or perhaps its foundation, yet it predates the known European settlement of the area. Some theorists attribute its construction to Norse explorers. Others suggest it was erected by 15th century Portuguese navigators. However, among a select group of researchers, a more esoteric theory persists: that the tower was constructed by fugitive Templars, utilizing designs that echo structures found in Tomar and Rosslyn. Its proportions are precise, its arches adhere to known Templar ratios, and its orientation aligns with significant solar events. Moreover, the surrounding soil has yielded artifacts of unknown origin, fragments of red clay and iron tools, inconsistent with known colonial designs. Coincidence, perhaps, but the accumulation of such coincidences becomes increasingly compelling. In the American Southwest, oral histories from certain Pueblo tribes speak of tall, pale visitors arriving from the east, bearing strange symbols and emitting light from their hands, possibly a poetic reference to reflective armor or polished weaponry. These narratives date back generations prior to the Spanish arrival. Some versions include the detail of red crosses painted on their clothing. Most modern anthropologists attribute these to folklore distortions or later assimilation of Spanish influence, yet the chronological discrepancies remain unsettling. Then there is the Kensington runestone, discovered in Minnesota in 1898. It bears a runic inscription detailing a Norse expedition in 1362. The stone has been extensively debated, hailed as proof of pre-Columbian Scandinavian presence, and derided as an elaborate hoax. However, embedded within its ruins is a peculiar, almost hidden cross pate. It is not Norse, it is Templar. Skeptics argue the stone was fabricated and planted by 19th century Scandinavians with a penchant for myth. Others insist the runes are authentic and the weathering legitimate. If the Templars had indeed fled to the New World, and if they had traveled alongside or encountered Norse explorers, this stone could represent the faintest echo of that journey. But what would have compelled their arrival? Refuge? Secrecy? The establishment of a final vault? Recall that the Templar fleet vanished from La Rochelle in 1307. 18 ships, by some accounts, slipped away before Philip IV could seize them. Most historians presume they sought refuge in Scotland or Portugal. But what if some sailed westward? The requisite knowledge for transatlantic navigation was already circulating in circles connected to the Templars. They maintained contact with Arabic astronomers. They meticulously preserved ancient maps, some assert even Phoenician ones. And with sufficient motivation, sufficient desperation, and sufficient discretion, they could have successfully undertaken the voyage. And if they did, they would have needed to mark their presence not overtly, but subtly enough for future followers. Crosses carved into stone, symbols concealed in groves, chapels constructed from memory. In Maine, a hill known locally as Templar Hill contains the remains of a stone foundation whose builders remain unknown. The stones are too large for 17th century settlers, and beneath a particular slab, a rusted iron cross was discovered in the 1,930 seconds, flared arms, a centered tip, a design uncommon in colonial weaponry or tools. It was quietly sold to a private collector and subsequently lost to public record. Is this still mere coincidence? Even in Mesoamerica, legends hint at pale visitors who brought sacred symbols, warned of impending storms, and vanished as swiftly as they arrived. In the highlands of Guatemala, one oral tale describes men of the sun who bore crosses not in their hands, but upon their chests. They offered no conquest, they requested only silence. So, what were the Templars doing if they genuinely arrived? Perhaps they brought not treasure, but knowledge secrets, requiring interment not in the ground, but in the depths of time. Perhaps they etched signs for future initiates. Perhaps their treasure was never intended for excavation but for decryption. A map not to gold, but to a profound tradition. This would elucidate the subtlety, the manner in which the signs remain concealed unless one knows precisely where to look, the way the stone resonates, only when illuminated by the correct light. A Templar cross in the New World does not necessitate a complete rewriting of history, but it strongly suggests that someone was present, and they left an enduring mark not for discovery by kings, but by those who retain the ability to perceive. The secret maps of the navigators, tracing the western periphery of history, from Lisbon to the windswept Atlantic, the trajectory inevitably leads to the Age of Discovery, a pivotal era when sails unfurled into the unknown, and maps fundamentally redefined the boundaries of human comprehension. However, beneath the widely recognized narratives of spice routes and imperial ambition lies a more subtle current, less celebrated and more meticulously concealed. For long before Columbus embarked on his voyage, long before Vasco da Gama reached India, a select group of navigators appeared to possess knowledge exceeding what was publicly available. And behind them, if symbols, shadows, and surnames are to be credited, stood the enduring legacy of the Knights Templar. Portugal, once again, serves as the initial point of inquiry. After the Templars were officially dissolved in 1312, their assets in Portugal were absorbed not by the Church or the Crown, but by a newly established entity, the Order of Christ, sanctioned by the Pope and endorsed by King Dinis. This order exhibited a remarkably familiar structure. It continued its operations discreetly from the same headquarters in Tomar, within the same chapels, and bearing nearly identical symbols. By the 15th century, It had positioned itself not merely as a religious body, but as the spiritual and financial engine propelling Portugal's unparalleled maritime expansion. At its helm was Prince Henry the Navigator. Henry was neither a king nor a sailor, but a strategist. Although he never captained a ship, under his patronage, Portuguese explorers reached the Canary Islands, Madeira, and eventually the coasts of Africa. Crucially, Henry also served as Grand Master of the Order of Christ. He utilized the Order's vast wealth, much of it inherited directly from the Templars, to fund expeditions that, at times, seemed less about active discovery and more about meticulous recovery. For the ships were not always merely searching, they were following predetermined paths. Consider this phenomenon. Portuguese explorers frequently arrived at islands that were not uncharted but already appeared on existing maps. The Azores, officially discovered in the 15th century, are depicted on the Medici Atlas nearly a century earlier. The island of Antillia, also known as the Isle of Seven Cities, appears on Portoland charts prior to any documented voyage that could have placed it there. And the names of these islands frequently echo terms associated with early Christian legends. Refuge, hidden knowledge, a safe land across the sea. Does this resonate? Then there is the intriguing case of the Piri Reis map, drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral. This world map contains sections of the American coastline depicted with astonishing accuracy. Most disturbingly, it illustrates details of the South American coast, and even what appears to be a portion of Antarctica, devoid of its ice cap. The map's creator claimed it was based on older, now lost charts. Some theorists believe those source maps were Templar in origin, brought back by the Order of Christ, preserved through secret channels, and eventually copied into Muslim hands. Naturally, such theories are impossible to definitively verify. However, an uncanny consistency pervades the evidence. The maps utilized by early Portuguese navigators frequently incorporated symbols found in Templar architecture, notations of wind roses, twin column motifs, and directional stars echoing the banners flown at Jerusalem. In one instance, a 14th century Venetian chart references a sea of darkness traversed by those who wore the Red Cross, not the Red Cross of Geneva, but the distinctive cross of the temple. Furthermore, many early explorers from Portugal and Spain originated from noble families with established ties to the Templars or the Order of Christ. Some bore surnames directly found in Templar rolls from the 13th century. They spoke of ancestral knowledge, of ancient covenants, of destinies fulfilled beneath the stars, which brings us to the stars themselves. In the Templar tradition, particularly in their rumored Middle Eastern connections, astronomy held profound sacred significance. The precise positioning of buildings, the timing of rituals, and even the carving of symbols were often meticulously aligned with celestial events. This practice seamlessly integrated into maritime navigation. Portuguese navigators were deeply preoccupied with stellar alignment. They named ships after celestial signs. Their maps were meticulously drawn with greater attention to stars than to coastlines. It was as if they were not merely crossing oceans, they were retracing paths already inscribed in the sky. And the ultimate objective? Some believe they sought a new Jerusalem, not a physical city, but a profound condition, a state of sacred order meticulously rebuilt in a distant land, liberated from papal control and royal betrayal. A place to preserve knowledge, to safeguard relics, to commence anew. They were not actively searching for gold. They were diligently following memory. Somewhere along the Atlantic coast of Brazil, within an isolated cove enveloped by stone cliffs, lies an inscription, a Templar-style cross carved adjacent to a set of numbers and stars. Local fishermen pass it without notice, but those numbers, when meticulously translated through navigational code, point inland toward a mountainous region, long revered as sacred by indigenous peoples, a region still largely unexplored. Coincidence? Or is it plausible that the navigating orders, funded by the Order of Christ, tracing routes on charts that demonstrably predate their own time, were not blazing new trails, but diligently following ancient ones. This would elucidate their confidence, their remarkable accuracy, and their relentless adherence to secrecy. For when one is not discovering something novel, but rather recovering something profoundly sacred, the stakes are fundamentally different. The whispers begin to acquire coherence, the legends of a fifth gospel interred in the West, the ancient narratives of knights who fled across the sea with sacred cargo, the pervasive sense that every map drafted during the Age of Discovery was not a beginning, but a deliberate return, and perhaps the most extraordinary idea of all, that the treasure of the Templars was not a definitive destination, but a profound direction. The Copper Scroll Paradox. In the spring of 1952, within a cave near Qumran, on the shores of the Dead Sea, archaeologists unsealed a bundle that rattled rather than rustled. Unlike the other Dead Sea Scrolls, delicate parchments inscribed with scripture and communal laws, this particular scroll was not composed of papyrus or leather. It was metal, two battered sheets of rolled copper, meticulously etched with ancient Hebrew script, oxidized to the color of aged blood. And unlike the others, this scroll did not recount theology or prophecy. It meticulously enumerated treasure, not metaphors, not parables, but tangible treasure. 64 distinct locations, specified quantities of gold, silver, and vessels, detailed descriptions of where to excavate, what to anticipate discovering, and occasionally, what dangers to be wary of. The estimated total value, according to conservative assessments, would exceed billions of dollars in contemporary terms. And yet, to this day, no one has ever located a single one of these deposits, not a coin, not a vessel, not a tunnel. So, what precise connection does this bear to the Knights Templar? The link is delicate, akin to a fine gold thread drawn through the tapestry of time. However, if meticulously unraveled, it begins to glimmer with significance. The Copper Scroll is broadly dated to the 1st century CE, associated with the Essenes, or another apocalyptic sect, from the Second Temple period. Its content reads like the frantic inventory of a community anticipating imminent collapse, a comprehensive list of sacred items meticulously hidden from invading forces, awaiting future retrieval. Yet, some scholars have consistently found its tone unusually dispassionate. The scroll is clinical, detached. It provides precise weights and measurements, names and distances. It alludes to secret markers, double-entry vaults, and even a mirror chamber. It sounds less like a priest's final testament and more like a protocol document, something a military quartermaster might compose. And, significantly, its structure bears an uncanny resemblance to the reputed organization of Templar treasure inventories. When Philip IV's agents raided Templar sites in 1307, they anticipated discovering ledgers' comprehensive catalogues of wealth. However, what they encountered were encrypted texts riddled with non-standard abbreviations and symbolic language lists that made little coherent sense unless one possessed intimate knowledge of the underlying system. The Copper Scroll reads, in a remarkably similar fashion, could the Templars have possessed knowledge of its existence? It is well established that they were stationed in the Holy Land for nearly 2 centuries. We know they undertook excavations beneath the Temple Mount. We know they preserved, copied, and possibly clandestinely transported documents. It is therefore not inconceivable that they encountered texts linked to the Qumran caves, if not the Copper Scroll itself, then the oral traditions surrounding it. And perhaps they did more than simply discover it. Perhaps they meticulously copied its methodology. Some believe the Templars created their own version, a mirror scroll, adapted from the original listing, not Second Temple gold, but their own sacred caches. These caches were purportedly buried across Europe, or perhaps even further afield. Legends persist of Templar maps drawn in disappearing ink, of scrolls written in mirrored Latin, sealed in copper tubes, and transmitted through secret initiations. More than one 19th century antiquarian claimed to have observed fragments of such scrolls in private collections. They described them as cold to the touch, impossibly smooth, and etched with spiral glyphs that resembled no known alphabet. One was purportedly acquired by an English lord and subsequently lost in a fire. Another briefly surfaced in Naples, then vanished into a vault. All that remains are echoes. Yet, even the copper scroll itself remains an enigma. Subsequent to its discovery, the scroll was unrolled with considerable risk, meticulously cut into strips to preserve the brittle metal. Translations were slow, and the meanings fiercely debated. Some lines are maddeningly vague. In the cistern by the portico, under the third step, what portico? What step? Others hint at traps beneath a slope. Beware the false stone. The wording evokes images of ancient booby traps, pressure plates, and concealed doors. These were not desperate monks burying trinkets. This was meticulously engineered concealment. And that characteristic resonates profoundly with the known modus operandi of the Templars. The notion that the Knights would have admired, and perhaps emulated, the methodical secrecy inherent in the copper scroll is highly plausible. The precise lists, the intricate codes, the profound reverence for secure storage, all align with their documented behavior, and the possibility that they may have extended this model across continents, creating a distributed network of treasure sites, fundamentally transforms the treasure hunt from mere fantasy into strategic inquiry. For here lies the profound twist. Some Templar documents recovered from later centuries reference something termed the List of Emptiness, a phrase long interpreted as having spiritual or allegorical significance. However, one scholar, cross-referencing early Coptic versions of the scroll, suggested that the phrase might actually be a mistranslation of a title. That emptiness referred not to spiritual longing but to a hidden space, a vault, an absence designed to be filled with profound value. And in one Templar fragment, copied in a Carthusian monastery in the 1500s, there is a line that resonates with a clear chime. He who finds the last well will see the copper truth. It is a cryptic sentence. It could imply anything, or it could signify precisely what it states, that some version of the copper scroll survived, transcribed, encrypted, and transmitted forward under new guardianship. This would offer an explanation for the vaults that no one can open, for the maps that lead to silence, for the gold that steadfastly refuses to glitter. Perhaps the treasure is not truly missing. Perhaps it is meticulously catalogued, patiently waiting, and all that is required is the correct scroll to unlock its secrets. The lost codex of Montségur. There exists a fortress, now crumbling, wind-lashed, and clinging precariously to the Pyrenean peaks, that once served as a final bastion against utter annihilation. Montségur, a name that, in the 13th century, tastes of ash and iron. It was a formidable stronghold of the Cathars, a Christian sect vehemently condemned as heretical by the Church. By 1244, following a protracted and brutal siege, the fortress ultimately fell. Over 200 Cathars were marched down the slope and tragically immolated in a mass pyre. However, as the flames ascended, legend recounts that something else was quietly lowered down the opposite side of the mountain. A small group of escapees carrying a treasure, not of gold, but a book, the lost codex of Montségur. To most scholars, this is mere myth-a-whisper, a historical footnote. Yet, for those meticulously tracing the intricate threads of Templar secrecy, the codex represents something extraordinary. A potential link between two persecuted sects, Cathar and Templar, and a possible key to the profound treasure that both may have sacrificed their lives to protect. Let us commence with the Cathars. Their theology was radical, overtly dualistic. They fundamentally believed that the physical world was inherently corrupt, a creation of an evil demiurge. Only the spiritual realm, in their view, was pure. They unequivocally rejected the established church, its sacraments, and even the crucifix. Their rites were highly secretive. Their internal hierarchy mirrored that of the Templars, with distinct layers of initiation, networks of traveling messengers, and even fortified holdings. It is not difficult to conceive how the Templars, who resided in the region for decades, might have shared ideas, if not precise doctrines. More than one chronicler noted an unholy fraternization between the two groups, usually as a calumny. But what if it was something more deliberate? An alliance forged out of necessity, of shared discretion, of mutual threat. Which brings us directly to the Codex. The earliest mention of it does not originate from France, but from a 17th century Italian manuscript discovered in an obscure Benedictine library. It references a libro demoniaco, described as a ciphered gospel clandestinely carried into shadow from the fire. There is no precise description of its contents, no direct quotations, merely the implicit suggestion of a profound secret salvaged from the ashes. Centuries later, a Jesuit historian named François-Paul de la Roche claimed to have seen a portion of the Codex, or a copy thereof, during his research into suppressed writings. In his diary, he notes a small, leather-bound folio, written in a script neither Latin nor Greek, conspicuously marked with a red cross and a star. The description is tantalizing, for a red cross and a star suggest a dual heritage, Templar and Cathar. But then Delaroche's papers abruptly vanish, not destroyed, simply gone, as if meticulously erased. Other whispers have persisted. A smuggled fragment, discovered in Languedoc, reportedly passed from hand to hand within the French resistance during World War II. A facsimile page briefly displayed at a Masonic lodge in Belgium, then withdrawn without explanation. And one letter, dated 1936, signed only A.G., and addressed to a London antiquarian, ominously states, "The Codex is not in France. It sleeps in the shadow of the Horned Mountain. When the time comes, it will speak again." Most dismiss these as romantic forgeries. However, a consistent pattern emerges. Each clue points not merely to a lost book, but to a code of inheritance, something interred not in conventional vaults, but in deeper strata, transmitted, protected, and perhaps not solely Cathar in origin. Some believe the Templars recovered the Codex after Montsegur fell, that they, already adept at concealing relics, recognized its immense value not for its theological implications, but for what it preserved. A map, a cipher, a record of something discovered in the East and subsequently hidden in the West, possibly even definitive evidence of the great relic, the one both groups purportedly guarded in profound shadow. One speculative theory suggests the Codex contains genealogical records, outlining a bloodline traced from Christ and Mary Magdalene, an idea largely dismissed by Orthodox historians, yet fiercely protected within certain esoteric circles. If true, it would render the Codex not merely a heretical text, but a profoundly destabilizing document, capable of upending centuries of established dogma. Another theory posits that the Codex is mathematical, not narrative, containing geometric keys to unlocking sacred architecture, enabling the reading of cathedral layouts, castle alignments, and even the precise placement of hidden Templar caches a veritable stone rosetta for sacred space. Whichever theory one favors, the implication remains consistent. The Codex is not merely lost, it is inherently dangerous. Why else would its trail be so thoroughly eradicated? And why, even today, do certain orders, both secular and ecclesiastical, treat its mere mention as taboo? There is a curious anecdote recounted by a French researcher named Héloïse Vautrin, who dedicated her life to tracing Cathar roots. She claimed that during a hiking expedition near Montsegur, in the late 1982, she encountered an elderly man living in a shepherd's hut. He spoke little, but when questioned about the Codex, he smiled and remarked, "It hasn't been opened since the fire, but the flame still flickers inside." She never encountered him again. Perhaps the Codex is real, perhaps it is not. But its legend speaks to something far older than recorded history, an inherent yearning for something we are told does not exist, a secret too profound for mere parchment. And if it indeed survives, it may represent the final page in the enduring narrative of the Templars. Not a vault, not a curse, but a book patiently awaiting its rightful reader. A unified theory, treasure, or truth. We now arrive at the precipice, the final threshold of our inquiry. The trail has been followed across burned parchment and sunken vaults, through crusader cathedrals and wind-torn islands, beneath mountains and myths, and into stone-etched codes. 23 chapters of clues, whispers, contradictions, and profound questions. Yet, one fundamental question lingers above all others, like a final, securely locked door. What constituted the true treasure of the Templars? Was it literal gold, a dragon's hoard tucked away beneath Rosslyn, or within the sands of Jerusalem? Or was it something far more enigmatic and potentially perilous? Let us take an inventory. The tangible wealth controlled by the Templars was undeniably immense. Castles, ships, vineyards, tithes. However, the true intrigue has consistently revolved around the concept of a hidden treasure, one that conspicuously disappeared, one that inspired relentless hunts, intricate conspiracies, and centuries of profound silence. But what if this treasure, whatever its specific nature, was never intended to be located within a physical vault? What if it represented profound knowledge? Many of the indicators examined point not to a mere stockpile of bullion, but to an intricate network of encoded wisdom. The sacred geometry embedded within Chartres, the musical language ostensibly present in Rosslyn, the navigational precision evident in pre-Columbian maps, the striking consistencies between the copper scroll and rumored Templar vault inventories, even the whispered bloodlines, cryptic liturgies, and legacy rituals meticulously preserved through Freemasonry. These are not simply disparate clues to a hidden chest. They are components of a sophisticated system, a structure, a method of transmission. And perhaps, just perhaps, that very system is the treasure. One compelling theory suggests that the Templars discovered something profound beneath the Temple Mount, an ancient document or a collection of texts whose contents possessed the potential to unravel the foundational myths of both church and monarchy. Perhaps these were records from a pre-exilic priesthood, perhaps scrolls linking Jesus to the Essenes, perhaps mathematical keys to sacred architecture, or even star-based calendars long lost to Western civilization. If such texts existed, they would have been deemed heretical, revolutionary, and utterly unpublishable. Yet, they could be transmitted in stone, in symbol, and in silence. This theory fundamentally reframes every aspect of the Templar narrative: the arrests, the fleet's disappearance, the coded cathedrals. Even the curse transmutes from an act of vengeance into an act of protection, ensuring the knowledge remained sealed until a more receptive world was prepared to receive it. And what of the vaults, the underground chambers rumored beneath Gisors, beneath Tomar, beneath the ruins of Montségur? They may not have housed mere treasure, they may have housed explicit instructions. There is another possibility, perhaps even more provocative, that the treasure was not solely information, but rather blood itself. The notion of a holy bloodline, purportedly descended from Christ and Mary Magdalene, meticulously preserved through centuries of shadow guardianship, has gained considerable traction within certain esoteric circles. It remains a highly controversial idea, vehemently rejected by orthodox scholars, yet it persistently endures. If true, the Templars may have protected not merely documents, but actual individuals. And if those individuals still exist, perhaps the treasure is not immutably locked in stone, but actively living among us. Again, this is not a provable assertion. However, it is logically consistent with the documented behavior of an organization whose rituals emphatically stressed purity, secrecy, and transmission. Then there is the financial theory, the proposition that the Templars did not lose their immense wealth at all, but rather transformed it into the nascent frameworks of early banking, into intricate trust networks, into Swiss accounts, and sovereign funds still managed under layers of discretion, for which no public names exist. If so, the treasure is not merely a static relic, it is actively alive, operating, clandestinely, funding something invisible, silent, and profoundly durable. However, whether financial, genetic, esoteric, or metaphysical, these theories share one unifying core: continuity. The Templars did not simply vanish. They underwent a transformation, shifting state like water into mist. They meticulously embedded their treasure into sophisticated systems designed to survive fires, swords, and empires, into rituals, maps, initiations, buildings, and crucially, into the minds of those meticulously chosen to carry the next whisper forward. This leaves us with one final, profound possibility: that the treasure was never intended for kings, popes, or even historians. It was, in a deeper sense, intended for the individual observer not to be physically possessed, but to be intellectually comprehended, discovered not in subterranean vaults, but within altered perception. Every cross, every carving, every meticulously placed chapel and pillar, they are not mere breadcrumbs leading to a dragon's hoard. They are tuning forks, intended to resonate within receptive minds, designed to unlock something far deeper than mere vaults. A unique way of seeing, a profound form of remembering, and perhaps that is the ultimate significance. The Templar treasure does not glitter, it glows with an inner light. Legacy of secrets, why it still matters. Consider a weathered stone path, winding through mist and memory. Its flagstones, smoothed by centuries of footsteps, some barefoot, some armored, some leaving no discernible prints at all. This trail does not lead to a mere vault. It leads to a profound question. Why does this narrative continue to haunt us? Why, after more than 700 years, do the Knights Templar remain so deeply embedded in our collective imagination, like a buried key patiently awaiting its turning? The fascination extends beyond mere treasure. That is the glittering allure we pursue, primarily because it is an easier pursuit than chasing shadows. What truly endures is the inherent possibility, the resonant echo of something profoundly concealed just beneath the historical narratives. We have been imparted the notion that a group of men once dared to safeguard something too potent for kings, too sacred for popes, and perhaps too perilous even to explicitly name. The Templar myth persists because it occupies the intersection where profound mystery meets rigorous discipline, where silence serves as an impenetrable armor, and where symbols demonstrably outlive stone. It endures because we are inherently drawn to the concept of guardianship, not solely of gold, but of meaning, of purpose, of knowledge, meticulously encoded not in mere words, but in architectural design, geometric angles, and sacred ritual. And perhaps, at its most fundamental level, it endures because a part of us continues to hope that the treasure is indeed real, not interred in the ground, but residing within us, an inherent capacity for curiosity, for memory, for discerning whispers between the lines of history, where subtle murmurs often resonate more powerfully than trumpets. The Templars may have long departed, their banners faded, their graves untended, but their story is far from concluded, for it was never solely their story. It has been, all along, intrinsically ours. Therefore, should one someday find oneself within an ancient cathedral or a crumbling chapel nestled in the hills, and the sunlight should strike a window just so, pause, trace the symbols, count the steps, lean into the profound silence. One might perceive it,